Chapter 663. False alarm. After hearing Anderson's question, Klein was momentarily at a loss for an answer. He couldn't just tell him that he had fallen out of a dream suspected to belong to Queen Mystic. He coldly looked at the unlucky strongest hunter, raised his right hand, and pointed upwards. "Is that so?" Anderson had nodded in enlightenment. "What did you figure out?" "I don't even know what I'm expressing myself." Klein discreetly twitched the corner of his lips and changed the topic. He said in recollection, "I met someone just now." "Not someone we know? Not a member of the future? The person who came out of the door from deep inside the hall?" Anderson suddenly became excited. "This fellow doesn't put on airs of being the strongest hunter. He's like a breaking news reporter." Klein lampooned without answering him. He directly said, "She got me to pass on a prophecy to you." "She? What prophecy?" Anderson was somewhat puzzled. If I were using my identity as Klein Moretti, I would have answered, "Sorry, I've forgotten." She only said it once. As Klein imagined the prank that wouldn't have happened, he said with a deep voice, "The most lethal danger often lies in day-to-day life." Anderson listened carefully as he drew a gasp. "That's just too accurate. I was drinking beer and nearly made myself a retard. Who would imagine that most of the alcohol on the future is problematic?" He ruminated for a few seconds and asked, somewhat worried, "That's it? Did you forget any details or keywords? I can tell that you're being provocative." Klein ignored Anderson Hood and walked to the entrance of the Hall of Murals, where he looked at Frank and Nina outside. Back in the library, he had been suddenly accused of being Hero Bandit Black Emperor by Queen Mystic. This inevitably caused him to be placed in a passive state. Afterwards, he attempted to throw her off and not be led by the nose. Therefore, he remained extremely nervous. His thoughts were completely focused on what he should say in response, without the time to consider the entire process and figure out the details. Now he finally had the time. First, what's most important is to understand a question. To what level of comprehension does Queen Mystic have towards my identity and Roselle's diary? Yes, she believed that I grasped the means to interpret the language created by Emperor Roselle, and not the language itself. Although the difference in meaning isn't great, it's enough to prove that our identity as transmigrators isn't something she has figured out, or have any clues that point towards that conclusion. Miss Sharon isn't a rookie who just joined the mysticism circles, or got herself involved in complicated matters. While getting someone to fake an identity for me, it's impossible for her to divulge who she's doing it for. Besides, the picture I provided was already Gehrman Sparrow's image. That means that Queen Mystic hasn't equated Sherlock Moriarty to Gehrman Sparrow. Yes, if she had already known about this, as I had previously imagined, a better form of address would be Mr. Black Emperor Sherlock Moriarty. This would have dealt my mental defenses a blow that was several times stronger than directly addressing me as Hero Bandit Black Emperor. From her standpoint, how did she gather useful information from scattered clues? She knows that the bookmark is the Black Emperor card. Hence, the spectre-like Hero Bandit Black Emperor and the strange spirit body, who stole the card of blasphemy from the Royal Museum, were connected together. Later, King of the Five Seas, Nast, suddenly appeared in the Rorstad archipelago. According to the law of beyonder characteristics convergence, she guessed that Hero Bandit Black Emperor might have appeared in Biam and the archipelago. After her investigations, she discovered the familiar identity known as Gehrman Sparrow. Then, from his identical trajectory with Hero Bandit Black Emperor's actions, she made a prediction and engaged in pursuit. She infiltrated the future and observed me up close. This is logical, but there's a certain level of coincidences in all of this. King of the Five Seas Nast appears anywhere he likes. Perhaps he might be missing a particular lady from the Red Theater, and got his ship to cross the spirit world, to enter the waters around the Rorstad archipelago. Or perhaps Biam happens to have the high-sequence beyonder ingredients of the Black Emperor pathway that attracted him. There's no way to directly link it to Hero Bandit Black Emperor. Of course, it's not incomprehensible for Queen Mystic to make such a connection. Perhaps she abides by the principle of being wrong, rather than feel sorry in regards to important clues. That's a good habit, but it's just tiring. There's also a high chance that she didn't lock onto Gehrman Sparrow immediately. However, with the reputation of the crazy adventurer Gehrman Sparrow becoming more prominent in the Rorstedt archipelago waters and the City of Generosity biome, she matched the timing after hearing the name. And then she came to a preliminary conclusion. It's still better to keep a low profile in life. Thankfully, my acting has finally come to an end. Subsequently, I can make the identity of Gehrman Sparrow vanish. Klein ran through everything and felt that he had mostly understood the problem at its root. However, he had another thought and guess. It was the way Admiral of Stars Katlia had received Gehrman Sparrow on her ship. She had done it in an ostentatious manner, as though she was afraid that it wasn't known to the world that the crazy adventurer was cooperating with her. Perhaps she was providing a certain level of clues. Later, Queen Mystic came and learned that it was Gehrman Sparrow. After figuring out the trajectory of my activity at sea, she had a certain speculation. Instead of trying to pull a bluff, she was actually rather certain. Klein held one hand in his pocket as he walked out of the Hall of Murals. He then headed straight for Katlia, who was outside the Black Cloister. He planned on using her turbid state to question her. At this point, he had actually relaxed significantly. This was because Queen Mystic clearly only knew that Gehrman Sparrow was equivalent to Hero Bandit Black Emperor, and he was a Beyonder who worked for some important figure. It didn't involve even more secrets. Even if she had connected the loss of the Black Emperor card that night to Detective Sherlock Moriarty, who was nearby, that wouldn't be a huge problem. From a very long time ago, I had already equated Sherlock Moriarty to the world, and I also equated that to the blessed of the fool. Gehrman Sparrow is only an extension of that identity. Haha, this is my preparation for such matters. I always believed that I shouldn't treat others as retards. As long as someone is active, any clues on their trajectory and social connections would lead to exposure. Therefore, I prepared this identity ahead of time for these smart people. I also strictly abided to these settings even in my everyday life. And for the blessed of an important figure, to have a basic understanding of Roselle's dairy is completely understandable and acceptable. It's within the realms of an ordinary bestowment from a special existence. You probably never expected that there's a mask under the mask. Amidst his thoughts, Klein also felt that the help from the gray fog and his caution had played a significant role. If he hadn't noticed that he had been observed by someone ahead of time, while instinctively abiding by his will, he might have summoned the messenger under Queen Mystic's surveillance. The messenger alone might not expose anything, but it's worrisome that Queen Mystic might have a way of tracking it and finding Mr. Azek. From his recent sightings, it's possible for her to dig out my identity as Klein Moretti. Klein tore through a square filled with numerous giant arrows, walked out the Black Cloister, and saw Katlia sitting there as she hugged her knees just like before. She was staring at the beautiful sunset. Klein leaped onto the boulder and came to the side of the withered trees. He looked at the magnificent buildings on the opposite mountain and said in a seemingly normal manner, "At Nas, you showcased the Star Bridge to connect the dock to the ship. Were there any hidden motives behind that?" Katlia's head leaned to the side a little as she said, "I'm not telling you." Klein was momentarily left at a loss. He originally imagined that Admiral of Stars would be very honest in the dream world. He had never expected such a situation. Of course, this was also a form of honesty, but it was an honest personality. After 2 seconds of silence, Klein decided to pull a bluff. "You wish to use this method to inform someone that I'm worthy of attention?" Katlia exhaled and remained sitting there, hugging her knees. "Pretty much. It was mainly to tell others that if something serious happens, or if I show obvious abnormalities, you will be the first clue." As expected, Klein sighed inwardly. He knew that Admiral of Stars had done such a cheap trick to protect herself, but as the fool, he needed to punish her for such actions. "However, I can't use this matter to act up. It will appear as though the fool protects his blessed too much. That will be quite lacking in standing. Yes, Admiral of Stars must have done more than this. I can tabulate these series of actions as one and punish her for them." Klein quickly made up his mind. He wasn't as flustered towards what he encountered in this dream world again. As for Queen Mystic's suggestion, He didn't even consider it. Emperor Rosel's diary contained matters of his transmigration and Earth. If he taught Queen Mystic how to read Chinese, she would discover this point and make even more critical guesses. She must have her qualms about the important figure who can randomly lend out the sea god scepter, so she wouldn't take any forceful actions. If there really are any matters that need her help, or if she has some dirt on me, I can agree to help her translate a few important pages of the diary she wishes to know about. But I'll definitely not teach her Chinese. Yes, even if I translate it, it will be watered down with the use of synonyms. I just need to maintain the main points. That way, she has no way of reverse engineering the language. Klein retracted his gaze and casually asked Katlia, "Rumor has it that you and Queen Mystic had a falling out, but it doesn't seem to be the case?" Katlia's glazed expression suddenly had a lively change. She pursed her lips and said, "What right do I have to fall out with her? I was just banished." Banished? Klein was just about to ask when blinding sunlight beamed as he naturally woke up. Looking at the bright sky outside, he wiped his forehead and muttered silently to himself. What a terrifying dream. After dealing with his wistfulness, Klein rolled off the bed and came to the deck. He continued his observation and awaited the appearance of mermaids. Nearly an hour later, he finally heard a faint, indistinct voice coming from the distance. Chapter 664. Every second counts. Mermaids? Klein felt delighted as anticipation and excitement filled him. Having left Backland for nearly 4 months and experiencing a series of events, he finally arrived at the destination of his travels. He was completing the last condition needed for him to advance to Sequence 5 Nimborite Master. His irascibility and frustrations had been constantly growing ever since he entered these waters, and it was all thanks to the waiting. The various ridiculous and humorous matters on the future, the matters that seemed abnormally harrowing on careful thought, and the dangers and unknown things contained within the night, noon, and dreams in the ruins of this war of gods had left him even more mentally tense. He lived through every minute and hour with great torment. Now the pressure from these emotions finally had a chance of being released. Phew! Klein slowly heaved a sigh of relief. He directly returned to the cabin and entered the room that belonged to him. Without being flustered or letting the joy get to his head, he followed the planned sequence of taking out Azek's copper whistle and Will Acceptance paper crane to interfere with the possible spying of Queen Mystic. After taking out the remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths, the pair of eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle, Drago bark, and a metallic bottle containing Sonia Island's golden spring from his suitcase, he spread them across his desk, entered the bathroom, and locked the door. He then familiarly set up the bestowment ritual. After setting up the ritual, he wasn't in a rush to go above the gray fog to respond to the prayer. Instead, he set up another ritual of summoning himself. While taking 4 steps counterclockwise and chanting the incantation, Klein arrived above the gray fog. He responded to the summoning ritual and used his spirit body state to come to the real world. He then brought Tinder back to the mysterious space. After doing all of that, Klein didn't relax. He came to the seat of the fool, conjured a pen and paper, and quickly wrote the divination statement. The singing ahead comes from mermaids. Taking off his topaz pendant, he used divination to confirm the situation. The singing ahead of the future was from mermaids. After calming his emotions, Klein summoned the iron cigar case from the junk pile and made it land on the ancient, mottled bronze table. With a snapping sound, he opened the lid and saw the pupilless all-black eye sitting there in silence. He could sense the extreme madness and danger from it, but it appeared to be in deep slumber. After observing it for 2 seconds, Klein took out Tinder and slowly wore it on his right hand. After completing all of this, Klein didn't hesitate and reached out his right palm and spread his fingers. All sorts of blobs of light surfaced before his eyes. Grayish-white, bronze-green, dark red, and black colors formed the foundation of this mysterious space. And inside the all-black eye, there was a flaring and flailing iron-black beam lingering around the remaining colors. Without using his spiritual intuition, Klein knew with certainty through his understanding of objects that the true creator's mental corruption was represented by this iron-black light. Feeling extremely wary, he closed his fingers and grabbed at the target before turning his wrist. The iron-black light was instantly extracted as it fused with tinder. Immediately, the illusory, evil, terrifying, and indescribable ravings boomed in his ear like déjà vu. This destroyed his line of thought as it ground at his psyche. It brought about a fracturing pain to his brain, but it was soon repressed by the gray fog's power and turned completely silent. Klein didn't think further. He followed his plans and reenacted the trial runs that he had practiced numerous times by grabbing tinder with his left hand, pulled it off, and threw it onto the stone ground of the magnificent palace. Right on the heels of that, Klein grabbed the all-black eye, which was now completely fine. He quickly replied to the bestowment ritual and passed the Nimblewright Master Beyonder characteristic through the illusory door and into the altar in the bathroom. He didn't dare delay any further. All he did was glance at the evil exuding tinder, which was tainted with an iron-black color as its fingers twisted and its palm cracked opened. He then used his spirituality to envelop himself as he stimulated a plummeting sensation to return to the real world. Klein opened his eyes, grabbed the all-black eye on the altar, and ran out into his room. While doing so, he had a thought. If I allow creeping hunger to watch what happens to tinder and its outcome, I wonder what its thoughts would be. Coming before the desk from the side, Klein took out an iron pot that originally belonged to the future. He then poured 80 milliliters of Sonia Golden Spring into it. As the pale gold liquid slowly spread out in a clear and transparent state, it made him subconsciously feel thirsty, as if he wished to drink a cup of it to quench his thirst. The items, Drago bark, eyes of the six-winged gargoyle, and the remnant spirituality of an ancient wraith, were thrown into the pot by Klein, causing different reactions. Finally, the potion turned into a pale gold color, but it looked ethereal as though it was weightless. At this critical juncture, Klein became abnormally calm instead. He steadily picked up the pupilless black eye and dropped it into the potion. He had already confirmed that the true creator's mental corruption hadn't penetrated the gray fog or returned inside the all-black eye, and this was something he had expected. The all-black eye was instantly submerged by the pale gold liquid as the surface began bubbling. Every bursting bubble made the potion turn blacker. About 10 seconds later, all the changes came to a halt. Inside the pot, the potion took form as a completely black liquid. Inside, it seemed to contain countless tiny worms that were squirming about, worms that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. Klein took out a gold coin and made a quick divination as a confirmation. After receiving the revelation that it was a success, he heaved a sigh of relief and poured the Nimblewright Master Potion into a metallic bottle he had prepared and stuffed it into his pocket. He didn't act in a fluster or rush. He followed the process he had planned by quickly clearing up the altar in the bathroom, and he retrieved Azek's copper whistle and Will Acceptance paper crane. At this point, he walked out of the cabin and onto the deck. At this moment, the symbols and magical labels on the future had once again lit up, forming a resplendent sea of stars. It significantly reduced the mermaids' singing. Rumors claimed that the singing of mermaids could make humans lose their reasoning and turn irrational. They would then jump off their ships to become food for the mermaids. Klein subconsciously nodded at the window corresponding to the captain's cabin. Admiral of Stars was standing there as her body swirled with starlight. The gaze she sent back at him appeared mixed. "Have you recalled what you said and how you acted in the dream?" Klein lampooned as he said with a calm expression, "I need a dinghy. It has already been prepared." Catlia pointed towards the shipboard without any signs of surprise. Gehrman Sparrow had mentioned that his purpose was to seek out mermaids back when he hired the future. Soon, Klein left the future and the protection of the resplendent sea of stars. He headed into the ocean on his tiny dinghy. As the singing grew louder, a voice seemed to drill into his spirit body, numbing his body, making him wish to hear more of it. This was far from sufficient for Klein. Besides, his spiritual intuition told him that he needed to be closer to make the singing clearer, so as to satisfy the requirements of the ritual. Storm. Klein took out a charm made of tin, and he summoned a controllable gale that could push the dinghy ahead. After an unknown period of time, The mermaids' singing increased in volume. They were so clear. It was as though they were singing softly by Klein's ears. Each tone stirred his spirit body, and the melody was intoxicating. Klein felt his mind adrift, as he nearly jumped into the sea and swam towards the source of the melodic singing. He tried his best to control himself, and discovered many reefs ahead. Figures were seated at its edge as they sang. These creatures with a human head had quite some beauty in their clear, pure eyes. Their breasts were lifted up high, but they were also covered by dark red scales. The lower halves of their bodies were comprised of massive fishtails, as they rhythmically struck the reef. The mermaids looked different and had different colored scales. From a human standpoint, they were all a different kind of beauty. Klein relinquished his control of the dinghy, raised his right hand, and reached into his pocket for the potion. At that moment, the mermaids sensed his approach and looked over. Then these creatures, who were also known as sirens, stopped singing out of shock. All of them leaped into the water with a splash. "Don't go." Klein feebly reached out with his right hand. "Isn't it said that you use your singing to attract humans for food? Why are you running with a human here? I'm not a bad guy. I'm only here to listen to your singing." At this moment, Klein's heart was filled with what the fuck emotions. He soon discovered that the mermaids' singing didn't completely stop. Further away on the reef were a few mermaids with their backs facing him. They didn't discover the fleeing of their companions, due to the crashing of the winds, as they continued boldly singing. Klein's mind stirred as he thought for a moment, and took out a charm. This was the charm from the sea god domain, that gave the user affinity with underwater creatures. Storm. Amidst the incantation, blue flames enveloped the tin plate, making it vanish from the real world. Although the remaining mermaids noticed him, they didn't flee in fear. Immediately, Klein took out the metal bottle containing the Nimblewright Master Potion, and unscrewed the lid. He made every second count so as to prevent any mishaps. As he gulped the potion down, a somewhat bitter potion with a mustiness surged down his throat, into his gullet, and into his stomach. Suddenly, Klein found himself abnormally stiff. He felt as though he had returned to Tingen, back when he was being controlled by the strange puppet known as Sealed Artifact 2-049. He tried moving his joints, but he felt as though they were filled with lead. At the same time, he felt that tiny worms were boring into every one of his cells, and into his spirit body. His thoughts slowed down as his brain reflected the gradual loss of control over his body. The mermaid's singing floated over, stirring those desires, the accumulated fanaticism and infatuation, allowing Klein to hold on to his final lumps of emotions. Through this temptation, he slowly escaped the state of petrification. A grayish-white fog quickly surfaced before his eyes as he heard the illusory ravings of Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. Compared to his advancement to a seer, clown and magician, these ravings appeared staccato, as though they were being disrupted by something. It's different from when I became a faceless. The ravings are clearly much stronger. It can intermittently break through the obstacles produced from the fusion of the powers of the gray fog and reality. I can think again. Klein was delighted as he attempted to raise his arm. His joints still felt heavy, but the feeling was weakening. At the same time, Klein saw his present appearance. His skin was yellowish-brown, like a puppet that had been buried alive for years with old bandages. Fleshy tendrils were hidden beneath his skin as they squirmed, separated, and fused. Klein immediately outlined the countless spherical lights in his mind, and he used cogitation to calm his present state. During this process, the mermaid's singing continued to reverberate in his ears, allowing his joints and muscles to twitch before the numbness slowly receded. After an unknown period of time, Klein opened his eyes, his body having completely restored to normal. He took a deep breath and silently sighed. Finally, I'm finally a Sequence 5. I'm finally a Nimblewright Master. Chapter 665. Spirit body threads under the strong sunlight. The sea reflected a golden shade. Apart from that, deep in Klein's eyes were countless illusory black lines. They extended from the nearby mermaids, from his body, and from the different parts of the neighboring waters. They were packed densely in thin and numerous threads, corresponding to different spots. Some extended into the infinite distance, to the ends of the void. This strange, beautiful scene wasn't an unfamiliar sight to Klein. In the few times he used the all-black eyes powers, and his usage of it to create the fake world, he had been able to see similar scenes. This was the source of a Nimblewright master's beyonder powers. From the knowledge he obtained from the potion, these illusory thin black threads were known as spirit body threads. By controlling them, one could directly influence the target's soul body, astral projection, body of heart and mind, and ether body. Then with the ether body as a bridge, one could control the target's body. Therefore, all the beyonder powers of a Nimblewright master was built on the spirit body threads. Firstly, it could find a hidden target using the spirit body threads that existed in every creature. It was the best measure against a demonist's invisibility and a shadow ascetic's hiding in the shadows. Of course, Klein wasn't aware if there were means to hide one's spirit body threads. Secondly, it was to control a target like a puppet. It would make the target's thoughts and body stiffen. This was a type of forceful control, and was almost indefensible. The only way of escaping this control was to rely on the potency of one's spirit body. It was almost no trouble for a Sequence 5 Nimblewright master to control anyone who wasn't a demigod. Thirdly, through the passage of time, the control would deepen. A Nimblewright master could completely turn the target into their Nimblewright. Up to a certain distance, they could hide behind the scenes and control the Nimblewright to do battle. While doing so, the Nimblewright could use all of its original beyonder powers. This is truly magical, terrifying, strange, and indescribable. It's the perfect thing for someone working behind the scenes. It's no wonder Rosago claimed that the control of spirit body threads is one of the most difficult abilities to deal with for anyone that isn't a high sequence beyonder. But it requires time. Control cannot be instantly achieved. It requires a process that deepens with each step until it's ultimately achieved. To obtain initial control, the present me needs 20 seconds. But with the digestion of the potion, the time needed will clearly decrease. Once my Nimblewright Master potion completely digests, I might be able to do it within 5 seconds. Yes, before the effects show, the target wouldn't even notice it. Perhaps those with prophetic abilities might be able to detect it. Once initial control of the target has been achieved, they will immediately be slow to think. Their actions will be impeded, and their bodies stiffened. Then bit by bit, they will develop into a puppet, a Nimblewright. If a Nimblewright master has a partner, this process will make it easy to finish off a target that has been forcibly controlled. Yes, if the enemy's spirit body isn't strong enough, a Nimblewright master will have the strength remaining to even draw a gun, or use a mystical item to act in concert with himself. If the controlling process isn't disrupted by an external force, the target will become my Nimblewright after 5 minutes. In a sense, the Nimblewright is truly dead, and the process is completely irreversible. Once the potion is completely digested, the time it takes to convert someone into a Nimblewright will definitely be greatly shortened. The maximum number of Nimblewrights I can control at present is 1. I can't be sure how many I can control in the future, but it will definitely increase. The limit seems to max out at 3. This will not only need time, but there's also a distance restriction. I can only see spirit body threads within 100 meters. And to control them, I need to be 5 meters from the target. When controlling Nimblewrights, I cannot be more than 100 meters from it. I'm sure it will increase in the future. Apart from keeping its beyonder powers, a Nimblewright can also normally use mystical items and sealed artifacts. Furthermore, it expends its own spirituality and not mine. Of course, my controlling of the Nimblewright will expend spirituality itself. This ability is very suited for me. In extremely dangerous situations, with me having no choice but to investigate, I can let the Nimblewright do it for me. Although it will be heartbreaking to lose it, it's better than having myself die. Back when Nimblewright Master Rosago came to deal with me, he must have been engaged in another operation. This resulted in him losing his Nimblewright. Yes, he must have not fully digested the Nimblewright Master potion. That's why he wasn't able to achieve initial control over me, while waiting for me to open the door. He had to enter in order to converse with me. In short, this lives up to being a Sequence 5 Beyonder power. Furthermore, the Beyonder powers before this have also been enhanced by 50%, or even more. I'm really looking forward to knowing what kind of qualitative changes I'll experience when I reach Sequence 4 when possessing so many strange powers. Sigh, I don't even know what its name is. Klein ended the inspection of his body and reflected wistfully. He then used the experience of setting an activation and deactivation method for his spirit vision to give himself a restriction of seeing spirit body threads, so as to not see things he shouldn't see. Activating by tapping my left thumb twice on the first segment of my index finger. Repeating the action deactivates it. Same for the right hand. He reined in his thoughts and looked ahead, and he saw that the remaining mermaids had turned around and were looking at him with watery blue eyes. At the thought that he would have lost control and become a sealed artifact akin to 2-049 without their singing or this simple ritual, Klein gave them a friendly smile. Affected by the charm, the mermaids also moved their lips and showed a somewhat embarrassed smile. As their light purple or deep red lips parted, one by one, Klein saw their teeth, razor-sharp like wolf fangs. They were white and shiny, and dripping from them was a sticky liquid. Klein was taken aback. He discovered that this was even more unacceptable for him than a real monster. He had originally mentally prepared himself and treated mermaids as creatures that swam in the sea. Therefore, no matter how crazy and terrifying they looked, he believed that he could tolerate it. However, the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. Mermaids were clearly beautiful and alluring females on the surface. Their tails had a hetero sense of beauty, but their teeth were nasty and disgusting. This was a stark contrast that Klein couldn't take. He nearly moved his eyes away. Waving his hand, he quickly took out a charm from the sea god domain and created another gale of wind to push his dinghy back to the future. Along the way, Klein couldn't help but recollect the feelings he just had. So the mermaid singing is meant for neutralizing and balancing. Otherwise, most faceless are unable to resist the corrosion of their own spirit body threads by the Nimblewright Master Potion. They would directly lose control. Heh, lucky ones like Calvetua aren't included. Perhaps it's because of the lack of the rituals help that it's relatively weaker. In theory, as long as there's a voice or beyonder power with similar effects, they can be used to replace a mermaid singing, but people who haven't personally experienced it themselves wouldn't be able to tell the minute differences. Therefore, high-sequence beyonders who aren't from the seer pathway will find it difficult to provide any effective suggestions. Amidst his thoughts, the dinghy returned to the future. With a rope, Klein easily returned to the deck. Anderson had stood by the shipboard and chuckled. So your search of mermaids was a requirement of a ritual, and not because you wished to obtain the corresponding ingredients. That's obvious, Klein succinctly replied. Anderson shrugged and said, No, it's not. A normal person will guess that mermaids are the ingredients you need, as this doesn't match the rituals needed by a Sequence 4. But who knew that adventurer Gehrman Sparrow, who was at the level of a pirate admiral, was only a Sequence 6? What do you mean only? Klein resisted the urge of controlling Anderson's spirit body threads. Ignoring the strongest hunter who automatically had a provocative halo, he entered the cabin and returned to his room. Just as he approached the captain's cabin, he heard a creak as the door before him opened. Katlia didn't wear her heavy glasses. She looked at Gehrman Sparrow as the dark purple hue in her eyes swirled. Congratulations on your advancement. Previously in the dream, did I say something? You know what you said, Klein replied with a deadpan expression. Katlia fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, You questioned me about my relationship with Queen Mystic? As she spoke, she couldn't help but look around. She guessed that Queen Mystic might be on the future, because of my rather sudden question. I really have to be careful when conversing with a smart person. Klein nodded, walked past her and returned to his room, leaving the corridor in silence. Only when he opened the door and took a step inside did he hear Katlia's voice sound out from the captain's cabin. It reverberated through the entire ship. Set sail for the return voyage. Inside the room, Klein waited a few minutes before re-entering the bathroom. He set up the ritual again, and through creeping hunger, which was turning more irascible due to the lack of food, above the gray fog. After doing this, he wasn't in a rush to leave. He summoned the distorted iron-black tinder, and made it land before him. After studying it for a moment, Klein placed tinder inside the iron cigar case, and threw it into the junk pile. Although this expensive glove was now unusable, Klein was certain that trash could still be used. Immediately following that, he slowly took off the already silent creeping hunger, and he similarly placed it into the junk pile. Phew! Klein remained silent for 2 seconds before leaving the palace that looked like a giant's residence, and then he ventured deep into the mysterious space above the gray fog. From his previous exploration, he discovered a bright staircase that seemed to lead to heaven. He suspected that the number of steps had something to do with his sequence. Therefore, he immediately came here to confirm it after he advanced. After walking for a while, Klein finally saw the holy staircase made out of pure light. Compared to before, there was another step, making it a total of 5 steps. Indeed, Klein sighed unsurprised. Then, he climbed up the staircase that appeared to be prepared for giants, and arrived at the top. At that moment, he wasn't that far from the gray fog which was hardened in midair. He seemed to just need one more step to reach that height. Klein subconsciously looked up and seemed to see something. Chapter 666. Afternoon Town. That's. Klein's eyes reflected a nearly transparent object. It appeared like a carapace of something, occasionally shrinking and vanishing from Klein's line of sight, and at times peeking out due to an invisible wind, revealing some of its outlines. With it acting as an anchor point, and looking further up, there were colors of green that was almost black, standing there silently. They looked like the colors of the trees of a dark forest. Klein mumbled without imagining what the object of those colors signified. All he could do was boldly guess that it had something to do with gaining a deeper control of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Without trying to do something that was destined to be in vain, he jumped down from the staircase that seemed to lead to heaven, and phased back inside the palace. With the existence of Queen Mystic in mind, Klein did some simple tidying up before leaving the gray fog, and returning to his bathroom. After tying up the loose ends, he walked to his suitcase, took out the sun brooch, and wore it on his double-breasted frock coat. After all the turmoil he had been through, the mystical items he could now use had returned to the state when he was in Backland. However, he was already a Sequence 5, and possessed one of the most difficult powers to deal with below that of the demigods. He was, in the true sense of the word, a powerhouse in the Beyonder world. I should be very agitated and happy, but I'm actually not. I'm even as excited as when I found mermaids. This is because I've just taken another step on my road to revenge. The true goal I wish to achieve is still a distance away. Following this, I should conclude the principles and digest the Nimblerite Master Potion, and seek out the corresponding Sequence 4 formula and ingredients. Yes, I can only do all of these things after leaving these waters. Next, I'll seek advice from Mr. Azek will Septon and Erodes. Haha, I should relax for the next few days. Being overly tense might break me down, and cause me to have symptoms of losing control. Klein turned to look at the full-body mirror in his room. Looking at his 1.8-meter-tall build, black hair and brown eyes, with a thin face and cut features, dressed in a white shirt, a suit with a bow tie, and a top hat that was matched with the pale gold sunbird brooch. He wore a calm expression with a deep dark gaze. After looking at this in silence, he raised his hands, and adjusted the buttons at his cuffs, and patted his black suit. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the stacked dark buildings ahead. Demon hunter Colin Iliad, with 2 swords on his back, pointed ahead and said, "That's Afternoon Town." He combed his grizzled hair, that was flying about in the wind that swept through the wilderness. "That's fast." With his axe of hurricane in hand, Derek sighed wistfully in surprise. He soon realized that it was reasonable. This was because the giant king's court was located somewhere near the City of Silver. Afternoon Town was the intersecting point that connected both nodes. With the lightning that illuminated the night sky, he clearly saw Afternoon Town in its entirety. It was built at the foot of a mountain and was naturally split into upper and lower levels. Instead of calling it a town, it wasn't much smaller than most of the ruins the City of Silver found. Here, the gray stones were stacked into different buildings. Some were entirely emptied out, nearing 10 meters. Some were similar to the residence Derek currently resided in. It was short as though any normal person would hit their heads onto the ceiling. These buildings were arranged close together before spreading out. Some of them had collapsed, while a number remained standing despite showing signs of age and tear. It's completely different from what's described in the textbooks. Derek suddenly recalled the knowledge he had learned from his history lessons. According to the City of Silver's records, Afternoon Town was the door that separated reality from myth. It was a place where humans and giants lived together. There was day and night here, but most of the day was in a noon state. Regardless of the fog, storms, or snow, none of them were able to blot out the strong sunlight. But at this moment, it was dark and heavy. Even if the area was illuminated by light, it lacked a sense of brightness, and there was no signs of life. Clenching his axe tightly, Derek, whose eyes had 2 miniature suns, was on the flanks of the exploration team. He followed Chief Colin into Afternoon Town. This area had been cleared once on the first exploration. The streets were covered with signs of rotting flesh and dry pus. It was completely silent. Be careful. There are many strange monsters lurking in the darkness. Colin Iliad, with his scarred face, didn't let down his guard. He drew one of his dual swords as the silver light on his sword converged. This is the mythical door? When the creator abandoned this piece of land, even the myths were abandoned. Derek couldn't help but imagine what Afternoon Town had experienced during the cataclysm. He instinctively felt that it was probably different from the Kingdom of Silver. Before he could carefully observe his surroundings in search of possible clues, he suddenly heard a teammate on the other flank anxiously cry out, "There's something!" Derek turned his head and saw a transparent face growing out of the wall of a 10-meter-tall stone building. The face was filled with countless cracks. With great regularity, they spiraled around the center, forming a single eye or mouth that resembled a vortex. The hurricane within the vortex was corporeal, as it spewed out with a howl. The dawn-like light from within was dense, as though they were arrows of light. Bam! 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 They struck a few members of the exploration team, but they seemed to strike thick city walls. All they produced was dull and closely spaced out thuds before disappearing into the dark environment. At some point in time, City of Silver Chief Colin Iliad was genuflecting. He stabbed the silver sword in his hand into the rotting gray ground. He had provided the front row with the strongest protection. At the same time, the other members of the exploration team methodically unleashed their attacks. Hurricanes of light and scarlet fireballs struck the monster. Right on the heels of that, the holy light that Derek summoned had landed on the vortex that resembled a single eye. Amidst the explosive boom, the boulder, which was originally covered in cracks, collapsed. A transparent face screamed as it vaporized. Although the battle was simple, Derek didn't feel happy at all. He had heard Mr. Hangman and Miss Justice discuss cases of Beyonder fights. Matching it with the experience the City of Silver had accumulated from resisting all kinds of monsters from the darkness, he worriedly discovered that the City of Silver had a limited number of pathways. Those who were not demigods lacked effective means of control, and the situation from before proved this point. Thankfully, there are sealed artifacts that are formed when monsters die to make up for this. Derek silently thought as he heard the chief instruct, "Move according to plan. 3 to 4 people a group. Search and clear the different areas." "Yes, Chief." The exploration team members were mostly rich in experience. They soon formed their groups. Derek's group consisted of 3 people. Apart from him, there was Joshua and Chaim, who had been to the abandoned temple with him before. The former was a Sequence 7 weapon master, and he had a mystical glove that could control fire. The latter was a recently advanced Sequence 6 Dawn Paladin. He was tall and reached a height of 2.3 meters. The City of Silver, which had warriors, also known as the Giant Pathway, as the main force, had an average height of 1.8 meters. Even if the Beyonder characteristics were inherited, The normal genes that were modified had accumulated with each generation. Although Derek wasn't old, he was nearly 1.8 meters tall and still had room to grow. According to the designated targets, Derek, Joshua, and Chaim entered an alley on the left in a triangular battle formation. They checked every building that still allowed entry. Perhaps as a result of the former sweep, they didn't encounter any monsters. They couldn't help but feel a little relieved. Rumor has it that the 6-member council plans to set up camp here and make Afternoon Town a stronghold. Joshua, who was wearing a scarlet glove on his left palm, said after observing the buildings. Chaim nodded and looked down at his two partners. The true target seems to be, he pointed diagonally upwards. The Giant King's Court? Derek asked in surprise. Isn't it a search for the sea where Little Jack and company came from? Don't we need to circle the Giant King's Court? Derek was filled with puzzlement. Chaim shook his head. I've only heard rumors. He swept his gaze and pointed at the entrance to the underground chamber. Let's finish our search here. Derek answered tersely. With his night vision and ability to emit light, he wasn't afraid of the darkness as he stepped into the underground chamber first. Chaim lifted an animal hide lantern, while Joshua followed closely in tow. This building's underground chamber was rather wide, with traces of dried, blackening pools. The smell of blood remained despite the many years that had passed. Derek surveyed the area and suspected that a sacrificial ritual had once been held here. A very, very long time ago. He silently added, and discovered a candle left on the stone table, which resembled an altar. He felt more certain about his guesses. Why would the residents of Afternoon Town secretly hold sacrificial rituals in their underground basement? When the Giant King's Court was in power, they were believers of the Giant King. Later, they came under the Lord that created everything. The owner of this building secretly worshipped other gods? Questions arose in him as Derek approached the altar. He saw that the stone table was originally carved with words, but they had been damaged by either natural or unnatural elements. After some careful identification, Derek found 3 names: Ouroboros, Medici, Sasser. Ouroboros, isn't that the name of the angel of fate? Mr. Fool mentioned before that Medici is also a king of angels. Sasser is another one? Derek suddenly felt excited and horrified as he hurriedly turned his head to shout out for his companions to take a look. But in his vision, the underground chamber was empty. There was only darkness. Chaim and Joshua, who were supposed to be behind him, were gone. Chapter 667. Prayer They're Gone? There's only darkness? Faced with such a sudden change, Derek's first reaction wasn't horror. Instead, he clasped his hands together and pressed it to his mouth. Pure light was emitted out of his body as he dispersed the surrounding darkness, illuminating every corner of the underground chamber. In Derek's living environment, darkness was the most terrifying existence. Once they left the City of Silver, they had to constantly maintain the existence of light. Even a brief loss of light couldn't last for more than 5 seconds. When Derek first joined the exploration teams and lacked experience, he had nearly killed himself because of such a mistake. Thankfully, the chief was standing nearby. As the light slowly and continuously radiated from him, Derek raised his tightly gripped axe of hurricane and carefully observed his surroundings. He discovered that apart from Chaim and Joshua, teammates who had entered the underground chamber with him, vanishing, the stone slabs and tufts of black hair on the walls had turned blood red at some point in time. They were moist as though they had just been sprayed on. This calmed down Derek, who was well versed with exploration materials, to realize a possibility. The problem didn't stem from Chaim or Joshua, but himself. All I did was approach the altar and silently read 3 names. Typically speaking, even angels will require someone to read or write down an accurate honorific name in its complete form before they can receive prayers. And it's supposedly limited by range. I wonder if the kings of angels require the same conditions. One of those 3 names was the key to activating the hidden powers in the altar. I triggered the problem by using Jotun, which can stir the powers of nature? No, that's not right. It needs to be said out loud. Even if these are the true names of the kings of angels, I've never faced such problems in the past. Derek anxiously turned his body while feeling perplexed. He returned to the altar and came to the stone table. He was surprised to see that the words and symbols on the stone table were a lot more complete and clearer than before. It was as though the host of the ritual had just drawn it. The words were written in 3 languages. They were in Jotun, Dragonese, and a language that Derek couldn't recognize. However, he suspected that it was the ancient Hermes previously mentioned by Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man. This was because he had a basic understanding of some words from the conversations during the tarot gathering. They were rather similar to the words used on the stone table. The content expressed by Jotun and Dragonese were identical. They repeated the 3 names and their corresponding titles. Angel of Fate, Ouroboros, Red Angel Medici, Dark Angel Sasser. Following these names and titles was an entity Derek was very familiar with. Rose Redemption. Sasser really is a king of angels, one known as Dark Angel. He, Angel of Fate, and Red Angel are the founders of Rose Redemption? I wonder if Mr. Fool knows anything about him. He definitely knows a lot. The words in ancient Hermes should likely be the same content. In Afternoon Town, which had already converted to the faith of the Lord that created everything, there were residents who were secretly worshipping the 3 kings of angels beside the Lord. Upon having this thought, Derek suddenly felt a chill run down his back. He felt as though he was close to the reason why the Creator had abandoned this land. When he looked up again, he saw that the walls remained red, but Chaim and Joshua were still nowhere to be seen. Silently repeating them didn't do a thing. Perhaps they don't produce any effects on their own. Derek drew a breath as he raised his axe of hurricane. He carefully walked towards the entrance of the underground chamber, hoping to find the problem at its roots, so as to determine what led to his present situation. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Like a gigantic candle, he returned to the hall upstairs. There were rich shadows here, making it gloomy and eerily silent. The rotting chairs and the remnants of stone tables remained sitting there in silence, no different from before. Failing to find Joshua and Chaim, Derek could only walk towards the window while he felt high-strung. He wanted to see if he could encounter other members of the exploration team. Thud, thud. Amidst light footstep sounds, he approached a huge hole that should have been a window sill. He leaned forward and looked outside. Countless dark buildings spread out, either tall or short, as they extended outwards like steps. The lightning in the air happened at a very low frequency, as many windows had candlelight emitting out of them. The dim yellow flames danced but weren't extinguished. Derek couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. He felt as though all the residents were still living in peace, just before Afternoon Town encountered its cataclysm. Chaim, who was carrying an animal hide lantern, didn't need to bend his back to enter the underground chamber. He jokingly said to Joshua, "This house must belong to a human, but their family definitely has giant's bloodline in them. They're probably my height. TSK, the last time we went to that ruined city, we had to bow our heads when using the main doors." Having a giant's bloodline didn't necessarily mean that they had giant blood flowing in them. Instead, it referred to a physical characteristic that was inherited by descendants thanks to the consumption of the Pathways potion. Being tall was one of its manifestations. Joshua looked up at Chaim and scoffed. "That was you. I didn't need to. But you won't take long before you can advance. When the time comes, you won't be shorter than me," Chaim said with a smile before glancing at Derek via the corner of his eye. It was to prevent any accidents from happening when Derek approached the altar. Joshua thought before saying, "Actually, I'm very curious. Chief is a sequence 4 demon hunter. He should be like an ordinary giant with a height of 3 to 4 meters. Why does he look very ordinary, with him being only half a head taller than me?" Chaim subconsciously surveyed the area and said, "Rumor has it that the chief has a giant form." "A giant form? Will his clothes tear when he becomes a giant?" Joshua asked with a laugh. "Unless his clothes and pants are mystical items." Chaim and Joshua exchanged a knowing smile. They were just about to turn their heads to share the joke with Derek, when they realized that the youth was gone. Derek, who should have been standing before the altar, had vanished. Chaim's and Joshua's expression instantly turned heavy. One of them raised his huge broadsword, while the other raised his red-gloved left hand. They carefully approached the altar and did a careful inspection, but they failed to identify anything suspicious. Joshua was just about to attempt to identify the words on the stone table when Chaim patted him on the shoulder. "Don't look at it. I just recalled that Derek was looking at those words before he vanished. Let's bring the chief here." "Okay." Joshua nodded. They didn't leave in a fluster. They surveyed the surroundings before one of them rubbed his index finger with his middle finger to light the remaining candle on the altar. This was to protect Derek, so as to prevent him from falling into true darkness. In the past, the exploration teams of the City of Silver had similar encounters in the ruined cities. A teammate might appear to have suddenly vanished, but they had actually been concealed by some kind of power. He stood in his original location, but with his teammates eager to seek help, they would leave the area with their lanterns. Hence, the poor bastard would be devoured by the true darkness, never to be found again. If it wasn't for another teammate finding themselves in another similar situation and having been rescued on the spot, the others wouldn't have known the actual reason for the previous person's death. With the candle lit, the dim yellow light spread outwards. Chaim and Joshua immediately left and arrived at the alley where they released a spirituality signal that everyone carried. They didn't wait too long for Colin Iliad, who had jumped off from the roof of another building before landing firmly. "What happened?" the demon hunter asked in a deep voice. The silver sword in his hand was already covered with a layer of light gray oil. Chaim immediately recounted what had happened. Finally, he said, "We didn't discover the reason for Derek's disappearance." "Derek." Colin nodded in thought, walked past them, and headed straight into the corresponding building. Despite the candles alight outside and the warm yellow color, Derek felt as though he had fallen into a frozen abyss. A chill at the bottom of his heart kept spreading. He clenched the axe of hurricane with his right hand and retracted his gaze from the town. He turned to return to the underground chamber and stood in front of the altar again. He had already determined that he was the one with the problem. However, he didn't have the urge to explore the strange afternoon town. He didn't even dare open the door. Derek wasn't nervous, nor did he show any obvious signs of flusterness. This was because he didn't believe that he had encountered something severe. As long as it's not an immediate threat, it's nothing severe. Derek took a silent breath, bowed his head, and reverently whispered, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Klein, who had been admiring the scenery of the battlefield of the gods, had no choice but to enter the bathroom, set up the disruptive items, and take 4 steps counterclockwise to head above the gray fog. He sat at the high-backed chair at the end of the long bronze table. He stretched out his right hand and emanated his spirituality, touching the crimson star which represented Little Sunday. Suddenly, the prayers turned abnormally clear as the corresponding scene appeared before Klein's eyes. He first saw the still hazy little sun, before discovering that the environment around him was abnormal. Swirling around the sun was an unspeakable darkness, and in the darkness there were eyes of different shapes silently watching him. The eyes were densely packed and hidden in the darkness. They were like unwelcomed observers which Little Sun hadn't noticed at all. Afternoon town, is that dangerous? Klein was very aware of what Dear Sun was up to lately. He thought for a moment, and instinctively believed that the darkness was extremely strange and surreal. Therefore, he abandoned the option of using the sea god's scepter to respond to Little Sunday. Instead, he switched to pulling him up above the gray fog. Klein extended his spirituality, but he felt as though the crimson star seemed to be in a quagmire, making it rather difficult for him to pull him over. Which king of angels has he crossed this time? With a thought, Klein made the mysterious space and the gray fog beneath him produce ripples. After advancing to sequence 5, he could stir some of the powers above the gray fog, without the use of the Black Emperor card and the corresponding rituals. Silently, Klein easily completed transporting Derek as his figure appeared on the high-back chair belonging to him. Meanwhile, Klein saw the strange darkness swirling around Little Sun's body shatter. The demon hunter entered the underground chamber in high alert, followed closely by Chaim and Joshua. They saw that in front of the dim yellow candlelight, Derek Berg's figure was quickly outlined like a picture. Chapter 668. Confidence might also be a weakness above the gray fog. In the palace that was held up by stone columns, Derek quickly repeated his encounter to Mr. Fool. Dark Angel Sasrer. The names and titles of these kings of angels seem to have been washed away by the rivers of history. Almost no one knows of them. If it weren't for Little Sun discovering them in the forsaken land of the gods, or me directly encountering the ancient evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel himself, I might not even know a single king of angels. At best I would have heard of the Amon family, and would have no way of delving deeper into the blasphemer. Where is this dark angel at present? Is he still alive? Is he still one of the upper echelons of the Rose Redemption? Klein felt wistful, afraid that Little Sun would ask him related questions that he couldn't answer. Klein instantly stopped his contemplations, and leisurely leaned back into the chair and said, "You have been freed from your predicament. Your companions will soon find you." As he spoke, he didn't give Little Sun a chance to speak by directly cutting off the connection. As for an explanation in the event that Little Sun was discovered to be abnormal, Klein disdained the thought of reminding him to fabricate an explanation. To mysteriously disappear, and then appear again. Wasn't it very normal that all sorts of strange scenarios accompanied it? At that moment, Derek was very grateful that Mr. Fool didn't ask him any further questions. This was because he was afraid that he would be exposed to the lethal darkness, or hidden monsters, once he escaped the alternate afternoon town. Therefore, he was eagerly hoping to regain control of his body as soon as possible, so as to prepare the necessary precautions. However, if Mr. Fool had really asked a question, he would still seriously and very patiently explain the corresponding situation. With his consciousness returning to his body, Derek rapidly recovered his senses. When he opened his eyes, he saw a candle which was almost done burning. The wick's flame was wavering in the wind. Immediately after that, he discovered that the chief was standing to his side at some point in time. The tall Hyam and the red-gloved Joshua were warily standing 2 steps behind. How long have they been watching me like that? Although Derek had already thought of a reason above the gray fog, he still felt guilty and nervous. Colin's wrinkled face was deadpan. He asked in a normal tone as he looked at Derek Berg, "What did you encounter?" Derek didn't immediately answer, as it would appear as though he had already fabricated an excuse. He used a trick taught by the hanged man. He deliberately paused for a few seconds, and as he recalled, he described while recalling the events in a rather staccato manner. "I saw the altar after entering the underground chamber. I suspected that it was an altar, and tried to identify the remnant words and symbols on it. I recognized 3 names. One of them was Angel of Fate Ouroboros. At this point, the light from the lantern extinguished. When I turned my head to look, Hyam and Joshua had vanished. I created a light source, and walked out of the underground chamber, and discovered that the outside was still afternoon town. However, many of the buildings had candles lit inside them as though humans were living in them. I didn't dare to leave the building, and I returned to the underground chamber. I attempted to do what I did again. Chief, in that afternoon town, the words on the altar were very complete. There were a total of 3 languages. One was Jotun, the other Dragonese, and another I didn't recognize. However, the first 2 languages expressed the same words. They were the names and titles of the 3 angels, as well as Rose Redemption. Later, I found myself back here. What he said was the truth, and it was very complete. All he did was hide the details of how he returned. Derek didn't have any hopes of successfully lying to the chief. He planned on being confused when he was pressed, pushing the reasons onto the abnormality of his body that he didn't understand. This will definitely make the chief suspicious. But Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice from the Spectator Pathway all said that he wouldn't ask too many questions regarding such matters. By appearing abnormal, will he think more importantly of me? I will be viewed as a chess piece that can counterbalance Elder Lovia. The outside world sure is complicated. It was only recently that I fully understood their train of thought. Derek couldn't help but sigh inwardly. In a dire environment, The depletion of every ounce of strength would mean more danger for the City of Silver. It had very few instances in the past, and even if it happened, it was basically concentrated within the 6-member council. The first thing the other Beyonders learned in their patrols and adventuring was cooperation. Colin nodded gently, walked to the altar, and attempted what Derek described, but he didn't disappear as a result of this. He remained standing in his original spot. From the looks of it, the remnant powers have already completed their mission, the demon hunter muttered softly to himself. I didn't even need to fabricate an excuse, Derek thought, feeling somewhat embarrassed. Colin thought for a moment before turning his head to look at Derek. What are the corresponding titles of Medici and Sasver? Red Angel and Dark Angel? Derek was honest. Colin nodded gently, seemingly in thought. In a small number of books, there is mention of a Red Angel, but with no actual name associated with it. As for Dark Angel Sasver, he has completely been lost to history. Derek was just about to take the opportunity to ask about the other kings of angels, when he suddenly noticed that the candlelight in the underground chamber had dimmed, as though a shadow was surging in from outside. Let's leave this place for now, Demon Hunter Colin said cautiously, having sensed the same thing. With the axe of Hurricane in hand, Derek immediately approached Hyam and Joshua to form a battle formation with them. However, just as he took one step, he discovered that Hyam had retreated 2 meters to the side. Joshua had raised his left red-gloved hand. Both of them didn't hide their wariness as their eyes keenly observed him. Derek knew that this was a very normal reaction from them. This was because lessons regarding explorations had the corresponding teachings. Be observant, and make less contact with companions who had just escaped a strange situation. And I haven't clearly explained how I escaped that strange afternoon town. Derek opened his mouth in a bid to explain, but he closed his mouth in silence again. He felt ashamed and aggrieved as he pursed his lips. Holding the axe of Hurricane, he turned and followed the chief, taking one step at a time, before leaving the underground chamber. The quartet soon arrived at the entrance, and was prepared to leave. To their surprise, they realized that the afternoon town with shadows cloaking its buildings had appeared to have darkened a little. Almost instantaneously, there was candlelight shining out from different windows from different buildings. The dim yellowish lights were either connected or disconnected, silent and heavy. Klein didn't stay too long above the gray fog. He quickly returned to the bathroom and put away the corresponding items. Let's hope that there wouldn't be any more incidents on Little Sun's side. It wouldn't be too good for me to repeatedly enter the bathroom. People in the know will realize that I'm hiding a secret, but those not in the know would definitely think that Gehrman Sparrow has a bladder problem. It would be a tarnish on my persona. Although I've already digested the faceless potion, Nimblewright Master Rosago went from one sequence to the next. The Beyonder characteristic he left behind obviously contains a set of the faceless potion. Using this Beyonder characteristic as a main ingredient is equivalent to me drinking an additional faceless, magician, clown, and seer potion. Or even more. Sigh. I should still try my best to abide by the various principles I previously concluded, so as to digest the excess portions. Klein made some clean water, and washed his face before walking out of the bathroom. Just as he was wondering if it was almost time for dinner, and was planning to take out his golden pocket watch to take a look, the scene before his eyes suddenly turned black. He could hardly see his fingers. It's night again. The intervals don't follow a pattern. If we encounter a monster and both sides are in an intense battle, what happens when the sky suddenly turns dark? Monsters are also creatures, so they need to sleep as well. Otherwise, there's a high chance that they will disappear into the night. Haha. Both parties in combat have to lie down and sleep, only to continue when they wake up. Is this really a story that can pass the censors? Klein, who had relaxed after successfully advancing, lampooned as he quickly walked to his bed. Just as he got in bed, he suddenly thought of a problem. The night here is very dangerous. If living creatures do not sleep, they will vanish completely. The darkness of the forsaken land of the gods, including the City of Silver, is similarly dangerous. If there's no light to disperse the darkness, Humans would completely vanish if the darkness exceeds 5 seconds. It's really similar. Could there really be some connection here? Klein shook his head and, with cogitation, entered a dream. Amidst the dream, he realized that he had switched locations again once he became lucid. The last time he left the dream, he was on the boulder where Admiral of Stars Katlia was sitting as she hugged her knees. This time he was facing a staircase. The light of the sunset shined through the colored glass panes high above, making the black spiraling staircase adorned with sculptures look exceedingly beautiful. Klein instinctively looked to the side and found Queen Mystic standing high up the staircase. This long chestnut-haired lady wasn't wearing her dress with open hems. Her top was a white shirt with lace and flowery bands, matched with a simple dark blue coat. Her lower half was still the beige-colored trousers with black leather boots. However, Klein believed that Queen Mystic probably had an entire wardrobe, or even a room full of trousers and leather boots of the same style. "What's the matter?" Klein took the initiative to ask. Queen Mystic caressed the handrail with her right hand as she slowly walked down. "Confidence might be a weakness at times. You trust that copper whistle and paper crane of yours too much. Perhaps one day, it will be the source of danger." Klein felt a little uneasy at that, but he didn't show it. "I don't understand what you mean." "Confidence might be a weakness at times," Queen Mystic repeated again. "Katlia trusts the sealed artifact she gave Heath Doyle too much. If I hadn't boarded the ship, then Nina, Frank Lee, and her would have died. But you might survive. That sealed artifact isn't actually able to block the ravings that fill these waters? That's how Heath Doyle mutated?" Klein acutely read in between the lines. Queen Mystic nodded. "Under ordinary circumstances, it can. But do you know who the ravings that fill these waters come from?" Without waiting for Klein's reply, she gave the answer. "The true creator." Chapter 669. Exchange of Information. The True Creator? The ravings that fill these waters come from the true creator? Upon hearing Queen Mystic's answer, Klein was surprised while feeling somewhat joyful. He was rejoicing because, just as Queen Mystic said, if she hadn't boarded the ship, Heath Doyle might have undergone a mutation, even with the existence of a sealed artifact, which could reduce his auditory senses to a certain effect. Towards low and mid-sequence beyonders of other pathways, they would only feel repressed and frustrated, or they would occasionally suffer from nightmares when faced with the true creator's ravings, without actually listening to them. But to a Rose Bishop, the sequence 0 for his corresponding pathway was the true creator. To be immersed in the ravings of this evil god, even if he was deaf, something would have happened to him sooner or later. Once Heath Doyle went mad or lost control, together with the uniqueness of these waters, it was truly difficult for the rest of the people on board the ship to be safe. However, Klein believed that as long as he could survive the sudden attack, he would have the chance to pray to the Fool and use the sea god's scepter above the gray fog to provide a response to resolve the problem. He was surprised that the owner of the ravings was in complete contradiction with his theory. He originally imagined that these waters were the battlefield between the ancient gods and the creator worshipped by the City of Silver during the Second Epoch. He suspected that the subsidiary gods, who were also the corresponding angels, had participated in it as well. To his surprise, this appeared to be wrong from the beginning. This was because the true creator had apparently first appeared after the Third Epoch's cataclysm. I cannot rule out the possibility that the ravings were later left behind. Klein didn't blindly make a conclusion. He watched as Queen Mystic walked past him, as she caressed the sculptures on the handrail and slowly walked down. The lady's back was tall, neither fat nor thin. Her figure was extremely proportioned, and her long chestnut hair simply cascaded down. This made Klein feel a sense of familiarity. After recalling the matters involving Queen Mystic, he finally recalled the source of the familiarity. Back when he was searching for the cards of blasphemy at the Roselle Memorial Exhibition, he had seen a similar back. Back then, the figure dressed somewhat oddly. Despite wearing a yellow layered dress which had the vibes of a young girl, she wore a black out-of-fashion bonnet. She was likely Queen Mystic. She had also visited the Roselle Memorial Exhibition ahead of time. Back then, She was looking at the basic education books the emperor had improved for his children, and the Chinese chess and toy blocks. She was certain that I had taken the Black Emperor card. The emperor's eldest daughter, Bernadette, established the element dawn to resist the Moses ascetic order. And from the diary, that lady appreciates the maxim, do as you wish, but do no harm. Therefore, from these 2 points, it can be inferred that she's likely a demigod of the mystery prior pathway. The mystery prior pathway sequence 4 is mysticologist. Queen Mystic. Of course, the reputation of Queen Mystic has long been known across the seas for more than 100 years. She's definitely not a sequence 4 anymore. Yes, after Catlia left Queen Mystic, she joined the Moses ascetic order. This queen seems to take the interpretation of Rozelle's diary very seriously. All sorts of fragmented pieces of information came together, as Klein suddenly had a theory. Perhaps Queen Mystic was Emperor Rozelle's eldest daughter, Bernadette Gustave. This might explain why this queen dresses in the style that resembles Earth's, but also appears rather strange. She has been deeply influenced by the emperor's preferences, and she's unable to completely extricate herself from the fashion trends. Hence, she mixes them into a unique and strange style she can call her own. As for it being aesthetically pleasing, that's a whole other matter. A beautiful person will look good and fashionable even with a gunny sack. Klein lampooned inwardly, but he wore a solemn expression. He unhurriedly followed Queen Mystic down the beautiful staircase. Queen Mystic didn't turn her head. As she walked, she said, "This dream world isn't vast. There are only 2 parts. One of them is the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite mountain, and the other is the black cloister over here." Giant King's Court? The majestic building complex that seemed frozen in the sunset surfaced in Klein's mind. This is actually the shadow of the Giant King's Court. And Little Sun and company happened to be at the entrance of the Giant King's Court, Afternoon Town. Queen Mystic said with a gentle but emotionless tone, "This is my theory, as it resembles the great Twilight Hall in Fasak. And in the 4th epoch, there has always been rumors that the god of combat is an ancient giant who survived the cataclysm. The god of combat pathway is the giant pathway." Klein inwardly expressed his agreement with Queen Mystic's theory. At that moment, he recalled the mythical information he had received from Little Sunday. He realized that the description of the Giant King's Court being forever residing in the sunset matched the spectacle of the opposite mountain. From the true creator to the Giant King's Court, she has revealed 2 extremely valuable pieces of information. She's expressing her goodwill to me, know the entity backing me. Haha. And the person backing me is myself. Klein calmly replied. The real Giant King's Court is in the forsaken land of the gods. He said this matter in an indifferent tone, so as to accentuate his value and the entity backing him. Queen Mystic stopped in her tracks as she pressed down on the beautifully sculptured handrail with her right palm. She half-turned her body to face Gehrman Sparrow and said at an adequate speed, "Rumor has it that the path leading to the forsaken land of the gods is hidden in the mountain across us, hidden in the shadows of the Giant King's Court. So Little Sun and company have begun exploring Afternoon Town? But didn't Little Jack mention that they appeared by the sea? The Giant King's Court and the shadow of the Giant King's Court must have switches in them. Only by opening them ahead of time can the 2 seas meet? This place is filled with the true creator's ravings, and it hides the secret of the forsaken land of the gods. It has remnant powers of the Evernight, Sun, Storm, Earth and Spectator pathway. This seems to correspond to the cataclysm. After the cataclysm, the forsaken land of the gods was isolated from the outside world. The goddess, eternal blazing sun, lord of storms, Earth Mother, and company saved the world while the true creator appeared. Only the spectator pathway's imagination doesn't exactly add up. Klein made a guess based on whatever information he knew at hand. Queen Mystic continued walking down as she said, "The black cloister here doesn't appear big, but each building and every level represents a different part of these waters. Behind every door might hide the dream of a creature." "I see." Klein glanced at the handrail and discovered that the sculpture on it was mainly that of a human's head. It was beautiful at a glance, but terrifying on careful inspection. Hence he asked in passing, "Whose dream does this staircase belong to?" an undying from the numinous episcopate. He came here in search of death's remains, one of the main requirements of the artificial death. However, he lost control as a result of the ravings, and he's forever loitering in an underground ruin, turning every adventurer who dares to enter into becoming his zombie, Queen Mystic calmly explained. Death was also involved in the battle of gods that happened here. It's no wonder Admiral Hell would take the risk and enter these waters from time to time. Klein felt enlightened. He wasn't alarmed about the matter regarding artificial death, as he had previously heard Demonis of Unaging Katerina Pell mention it before. Furthermore, the numinous episcopate seemed to be rather far from success. At this moment, just as Queen Mystic finished walking down the stairs, she turned to glance at him. Right on the heels of that, the lady turned into a corridor and entered a building. Klein surveyed the area and discovered that there was no longer any stairs leading downwards. They were apparently at the bottom level. Queen Mystic stopped in front of the black wooden door filled with strange patterns. She gripped its handle and said, "I've always suspected that the dream within is the key to sustaining this place. The remnant powers of Evernight only provides the possibility of such a development." As she spoke, she twisted the handle and opened the door. The black door slowly moved backward, and behind it wasn't a room as Klein had imagined, but a sea. The sea was illuminated by blinding sunlight. The waves were huge swaths of rich gold. As the door opened, Klein felt an unimaginable aura seep out from inside. The entire building began to quake in an obvious manner, as the dust and bricks on the wall began to fall. Subtly, Klein felt that the dream was on the brink of shattering. At this moment, Queen Mystic pulled her right hand, shutting the black wooden door tightly. Everything was restored to normal as a result of this. "Even I do not dare enter," this mighty figure in the mysterious world said. "This place has the dreams of certain remnant deities," Klein said calmly as though he had someone backing him, allowing him to grasp the situation ahead of time. Queen Mystic turned around as her blue eyes swept over Gehrman Sparrow's face. "These waters and this black cloister hide a lot of secrets. My understanding of it might not even reach a single %. She didn't continue as she silently looked at Gehrman Sparrow, as though waiting for something. "What intense pressure?" Klein thought for a moment and asked probingly, "Do you know the activation incantation of the Black Emperor card?" Queen Mystic fell silent for a few seconds and shook her head. Klein looked her in the eye. "Bernadette." The entire corridor turned so silent that even their breathing could be heard. Queen Mystic's lips moved a little before they pursed together. Her blue eyes temporarily lost their focus, but they quickly recovered their profundity. Queen Mystic turned around at an adequate speed, walked to the black staircase, and said without a change in tone, "The dream is ending." Klein looked at her back move up the black staircase until the blinding light drowned out everything. Afternoon town. Upon seeing the candlelight light up in the buildings outside, the silent town seemed to come to life. Derek felt as though they had plummeted into a nightmare, as they instantly tensed up. Demon Hunter Colin observed for a while before solemnly saying, "We are in the real world. The power of the altar has leaked out." Chapter 670. Repenta. That strange afternoon town has infiltrated the afternoon town in reality? Derek vaguely understood what the chief was saying as he had a rough guess as to why this had happened. He suspected that when Mr. Fool pulled him out of the strange afternoon town, he had broken an intricate balance, causing the powers to seep out. This also explained why Demon Hunter Colin Iliad didn't vanish immediately when he repeated the attempt. Just as Derek was wondering what kind of changes this would bring, the chief of the 6-member council, Colin, had taken out a luminescent powder from a pouch on his belt, and he scattered it in the air. The powder suddenly blasted apart, spewing silver light upwards. It made it appear extremely obvious in such a dark environment. Derek, Hyam, and Joshua knew very well what this signal meant. It meant not to run about haphazardly. Stay in your area, be wary against any incoming enemies, and await rescue. Without a doubt, this was a signal to all the other exploration teams scattered across Afternoon Town. Colin consecutively released the signal thrice in the span of 2 lightning bolts. Then, he turned and said to Derek and company, We shall meet up with the rest by combing outwards. Be careful along the way. Yes, Chief. Derek had already forgotten the grievance from before, only wishing that he could help his partners as soon as possible. Following Colin's instructions, he took the left flank of the small team. On the other side was the red-gloved Joshua, who held an iron-black sword. Lining the back was the relatively stronger Dawn Paladin Hyam, and right in front was the Dawn Paladin, who was about 3 steps away. As lightning flashed at relatively fast intervals, the gloomy afternoon town would go from being bright to darkness. The candlelight from each window showed a wavering flame that burned in silence and calmness. Derek was no longer the fledgling he once was. Although he was nervous, his palm didn't sweat while holding the axe of Hurricane. He skillfully moved his gaze around, wary against any monster that might leap out from the buildings on both sides. After a flash of lightning, the world was thrown back into darkness. The bits of candlelight in afternoon town seemed to await travelers that needed lodging. As for the animal hide lantern in Hyam's hand, its light scattered outward, but it failed to produce much light in a radius around him. It wasn't as effective as Derek's night vision. The only usage was that it appeared to dispel the rich darkness around them. At that moment, Derek suddenly felt a chill down his neck, but there wasn't any cold winds. He didn't turn his head subconsciously. Instead, he took one step diagonally, half-turned his body, and glanced through the corner of his eye. He saw the nearly 2-3-meter-tall Hyam looking at him with a gloomy expression. He cleaved down with the broadsword in his hand. Bang! Derek somersaulted to dodge the strike, as he seemed to still hear the echoing sound of the intense wind. Following that, he heard the chief's voice. What happened? Hyam attacked me. Derek rolled towards Colin's direction and stood up. Me. Hyam held the animal hide lantern in one hand, and his broadsword in the other, asking with a look of puzzlement. Colin glanced at Derek. I didn't discover any abnormality on his part. As he spoke, the demon hunter's eyes produced 2 dark green symbols. He surveyed the area and said, The attacker transformed its appearance to Hyam's? Before he finished his sentence, the silver sword that was clenched tightly in his right hand stabbed backward. Oof! Amidst the dull clashing sounds, a figure appeared in the dark environment. He had grizzled and disheveled hair, with deep wrinkles. He had weathered but profound blue eyes, and he held a silver sword with light gray oil slathered over it, looking identical to Demon Hunter Colin. The only difference was his gloomy expression and dark skin. Bam! 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 2 silver swords clashed in midair, sending sparks flying. Meanwhile, Colin Iliad shouted with a deep voice, Light! Light! Derek instinctively raised his hands and pressed them to his mouth and nose. At that instant, he discovered 3 figures dashing out from the surrounding darkness. One of them was the tall and muscular Hyam, another the red-gloved Joshua, and the last one was a tall person with a childlike appearance, Derek himself. Derek wasn't thrown into a fluster. He acted in accordance with the chief's instructions and released lustrous brilliance from his body. The 3 figures seemed horrified of this, as they raised their palms to cover their faces while attempting to escape to the sides. However, their speeds were in no way comparable to the speed of light. The lustrous brilliances illuminated the surroundings, enveloping the 3 figures within. They opened their mouths and let out silent screams, but they soon dimmed and vanished. As the light surged outwards, the 2 demon hunters were consumed by the light. The actions of one of them immediately turned stiff, and was impeded before losing its color and turning completely black. Oof! The silver sword with light grayish oil slathered on it penetrated the monster, but it seemed to stab into air, failing to cause any actual damage. At this moment, the black monster suddenly immolated itself, cracking into distorted shadows as they corroded the light and flames, inch by inch. Colin retracted his silver sword and turned his head to Derek and company. The monsters this time are our shadows. Their weakness is the brightness of light. As he spoke, the chief's body produced a bright and holy light of dawn, illuminating the entire street as though it was day. This was a beyonder power a Dawn Paladin would receive from the warrior pathway. The reason why he didn't use it from the beginning was because the effects were obvious. and he had no idea what kind of accident it might bring. Now, he was already aware of the weaknesses of these monsters in Afternoon Town. The light of dawn produced by the chief was like a domain. Hyam gave up his plans on using a similar beyonder power. He continued holding up his animal hide lantern, and he followed behind Colin Iliad with Derek and Joshua as they turned into another street. Before long, the quartet arrived at a half-collapsed cathedral. The cathedral originally had a tower, and its entirety was made up of classical stone columns and masonry. They were heavy and dark. Passing through the door that even a giant would find wide, Derek followed the chief and came to the prayer hall. They saw the deity's statue destroyed, but the candle on the altar had been lit by some unknown entity. In front of the altar, a figure donning a Spartan white robe was prostrated there, praying so softly that no one could hear him. "He's not one of us." Hyam, who also had night vision, was the first to discover the abnormality thanks to his height. "This means that it's not a monster that was transformed from our teammates' shadows." Derek helped Hyam express the context between the lines inwardly. This meant an unknown, and an unknown often represented extreme danger. There should have been an exploration team here. Colin converged the range of his light of dawn to prevent himself from provoking the white-robed figure. Hyam, Joshua, and Derek suddenly fell silent. Under such a situation, the absence of the exploration team's immediate appearance basically meant an undesirable outcome. Their minds raced as two men dressed in tight black clothes walked out from the right side of the hall. They were the two members of the exploration team at the cathedral. "Chief, those shadows are problematic." Leroya was swallowed by his own shadow. One of the teammates swiftly made his way to Colin and immediately said in agitation and fear, "Has someone already been sacrificed?" While Derek's heart sank, he saw the light of dawn expand, enveloping the two teammates within. The two of them suddenly wore ferocious expressions as their bodies rapidly darkened. Just 2 seconds later, they completely vanished like shadows that had been illuminated. Smack! 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 White bones and globs of bloody flesh fell from their bodies, smashing to the ground. Light slowly effused out of these mangled carcasses. Colin retracted his gaze as he said, without an expression, "Go to the side of the ecclesiastic and hear what it's reciting." Derek and company nodded in silence as they set off towards the collapsed statue. About 10 steps later, they discerned the white-robed figure's appearance from diagonally across. He was a crying middle-aged man with deep features. This ecclesiastic's face was nearly plastered to the ground as he muttered to himself, "Omnipotent Lord, I repent." Tempted Sasrer. The kings often came to the palace belonging to the dusk to conspire. It was unknown when the people in this town changed. They set up secret altars and held strange rituals, doing things you forbade. It was already too late by the time I discovered all of this. Degeneration, bloodshed, darkness, rot, murders, corruption, and shadows had already drowned this piece of land. A huge calamity will begin here. These words kept repeating like a prophet, describing the inevitable future with a heavy voice. A huge calamity would begin here? The abandonment from the Lord that created everything of this land. Is this where it began? Also, who tempted Dark Angel Sasrer? This ecclesiastic should have stated who. It's because after he said the words, "I repent," there should have been a name, but it was blank. He had originally said it, but the name vanished by itself? Who wiped it away? This ecclesiastic should have been from that strange afternoon town. After the balance was broken, he appeared here. Otherwise, he should have been discovered on the previous exploration. Many thoughts flashed through his mind in a short span of time. At that moment, he saw the chief take a stride, walking to the side of the ecclesiastic in white. Klein woke up from his dream, as the midday sunlight shone at his eyes from outside the window. He rolled out of bed, and he unhurriedly arrived at the pirates' dining hall. When Frank Lee saw his arrival, he immediately waved at him. "Gehrman, I discovered something new." "Fuck, what now?" Klein immediately felt his heart in his mouth. "A new invention of yours?" "No, it isn't." Frank shook his head in excitement. "I was planning on studying the fish in these waters. They will likely be able to dream. Just as I tried fishing, I ended up getting this strange item. Chapter 671. The fourth name strange item? Klein instantly felt a headache, but he asked with an unperturbed expression, "What is it?" "Fish with human fingers growing in them." Without waiting for Gehrman Sparrow's reply, Frank ran into the dining hall. Before long, he ran back and held a strange bluish-black fish in his hand. The fish was of normal length. In the space where its eyes were, it had a face resembling a human. Its belly had been dissected, and 3 bloody fingers could be seen stuffed inside. "It wasn't inserted by me. It was originally like that. Look at its teeth. It's very unlikely that it will eat something like that, so it can only be the case of the fingers producing themselves. Of course, I'm currently unable to determine what the fingers will do to its body." Frank hurriedly explained his judgment. Klein glanced at the fish and said after some deliberation, "It might also be stuffed inside by someone." "Makes sense. Then it's not the most unique fish." Frank was stunned for a second as he appeared somewhat disappointed. "Fingers are considered flesh and blood. I'll ask Heath. He's an expert on such matters." As he spoke, he surveyed the area and found Heath Doyle, who was huddled in a corner eating. Frank quickly went over and placed the bluish-black fish before Bloodless. Heath Doyle extended his hands and pressed his face to the fish. Upon seeing this scene, Frank had a baffling feeling that something was amiss. He soon reacted and laughed. "No, this isn't food for you. You've been eating fish all this time to the point that even your body smells of fish. What I meant was to ask if you know the fingers inside the fish's stomach. Can you find its original owner?" Heath Doyle stopped his leaning actions and carefully studied it for a few seconds. "They belong to a Rose Bishop's, at least a Rose Bishop's." He took out the 3 bloody fingers and stacked them together. After a brief moment, the fingers melted like wax, turning into a puddle of sticky flesh and blood. The flesh and blood squirmed as they drew a word in blood red. "Help! Fingers from a Rose Bishop. Help!" Upon seeing this scene, Klein instantly made some connections. He recalled the Saint of Darkness and Leo Master from the dream world. This Aurora Order saint was in a particular ruin, and he was affected by the remnant powers of an angel or deity of the spectator pathway, causing him to dissociate and transform into a kind character. This resulted in him being trapped there. His good and evil side constantly fought, often clashing at the psyche level. The main persona, which was more inclined towards the darkness, gradually held the advantage as the good personality hit everywhere in the mind world in search for help. Therefore, this is an attempt by Leo Master's good side to call for help. As a saint of the Aurora Order, he might very well have advanced from a shepherd, so it's nothing strange to have the beyonder powers of a Rose Bishop. Klein nodded in thought, believing that his judgment was likely close to the truth. "Help? How?" Frank Lee turned his head at Gehrman Sparrow with a blank look. "You should ask your captain, not me." Klein shook his head. "You don't have to bother. There are too many oddities with these waters." The reason for giving this opinion was that, from the dream, Leo Master's main persona held the absolute advantage. To really rescue him, he needed to make preparations to deal with a demigod. Although the good side would definitely interfere with it, all it could do was lower the Saint of Darkness's strength to a certain extent. It would still remain a demigod. Of course, with Queen Mystic on board the future, to make any actual attempts wasn't impossible. But if Leo Master were so easily rescued, and have him become a completely good Saint of Darkness, Klein believed that the Queen would have long done so. The reason why she didn't take action had to be because it was unrealistic. For example, the place where Leo Master is at causes one's spirit to dissociate, so much so that Queen Mystic doesn't even dare challenge it. Leo Master's dream was only partially restored. It nearly made me face a situation I couldn't deal with. Finally, I resolved the problem quickly with the Sea God Scepter. If I were to meet him in the real world, I'd really suffer a dissociation in personality, becoming a member of an asylum. I would have to find a way to borrow the mental terror candle from Father Utravsky to have a chance of being treated. Haha. I can also get Miss Justice to treat me, but she's still lacking in strength at the moment. Klein recalled the past as he jested inwardly. Yeah, frankly trusted Gehrman Sparrow a lot. Perhaps the fellow who's asking for help is long dead. Upon saying this, His eyes suddenly lit up as he stared at Heath Doyle. Can you wipe out the mental imprint left on this flesh and blood? Yes, Heath Doyle replied succinctly. The ends of Frank Lee's mouth cracked open bit by bit, as he smiled like a 200-pound child. I've always been very curious about the flesh and blood structure of a rose bishop. I've always thought of the outcome of using similar flesh and blood as the medium for crossbreeding. One day, you will die amidst your experiments. Thankfully, I'll be leaving this ship soon. Klein had the baffling impression of a brattish child entering an armory. Heath Doyle, whose face was nearly translucent from the paleness, was taken aback for 2 seconds before sincerely saying, "Thank you." "Why thank me?" Frank Lee scratched his head, looking completely puzzled. He's probably thanking you for being able to hold back your curiosity and not using his flesh and blood as the experimental subject. You are a partner worth trusting. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a bit in an attempt to interpret the reason. He realized that the future's first and second mate had rather strange thought processes. Afternoon town. In the half-collapsed cathedral, Colin stood by the side of the ecclesiastic in white and softly asked, "Who are the kings? What is the huge calamity? Who tempted Sasser?" The ecclesiastic didn't seem to hear him, as he continued prostrating to the ground. He repeated his words of penitence, as though he was an illusory recording left behind by the environment. A wraith specter, or an evil spirit? Derek looked in that direction, feeling somewhat nervous. Seeing no response from the ecclesiastic, Colin reached out his right hand, inching his silver sword towards the person. However, despite the sharp blade tip reaching the back of his head, the ecclesiastic remained in penitence, as though nothing had changed. Colin Iliad retracted his silver sword as he surveyed the area with dark green symbols in his eyes. Then, he walked diagonally to the altar ahead, as he cast his gaze onto the candle emitting a yellow light. After a few seconds of silence, he reached out his left hand and extinguished the entirety of the candlelight. The collapsed deity's statue in the middle of the altar suddenly turned dim, as the prostrating white-robed man finally stopped his penitence. He slowly lifted his head. It was a gloomy green, and his gaze was filled with hatred. Before Derek, Chaim, and Joshua could react in time, the devout ecclesiastic had pounced forward with an exceedingly fast speed, drawing out an afterimage. Colin was already prepared for it. He took a step diagonally forward with his right foot, turned his body halfway, and swept backward with the silver sword in his left hand. On the sword, spots of light soared, instantly forming a gigantic storm. The storm that was formed purely out of light swept the surroundings, leaving the ecclesiastic frozen in midair, before he was completely devoured. The storm quickly came to an end as Colin looked at the ecclesiastic whose body had been infused with the light of dawn. Then he repeated his previous questions again. Who are the kings? What is the huge calamity? Who tempted Sasser? The ecclesiastic, whose figure was already very indistinct, replied in a dazed manner. The kings are Sasser, Ouroboros Medici. Just as he was about to say the fourth name, a transparent flame tore through him from the inside. The flame instantly engulfed him, burning him into a spreading black gas. So the kings refer to the kings of angels. What's the fourth name? Why did he self-destruct just as he was about to say it? Is it the one who tempted Sasser, or someone else? Derek was filled with questions. As the ecclesiastic died, the streets outside and the entirety of Afternoon Town suddenly produced roars that sounded like wild beasts. Derek subconsciously looked out the window and saw a gigantic face. The glass where it was originally plastered to had grown a single unique eye. On its face was short and dense black hair. Tap, tap, tap. Another similar monster rushed out from inside the cathedral. It had the build of an ordinary human and 2 eyes, but the surface of its body was similarly covered with short black hair that resembled a beast's. A degenerate town that has been completely corrupted. Colin sighed as he faced one of the monsters. Derek, Chaim, and Joshua also took up battle positions in a bid to fend off the remaining monster. The future continued cruising in peace before encountering a brief night once more. After Klein entered the dream world, he found himself back in his original position, by Admiral of Stars Catlia's side. He was just about to look at the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite side of the mountain, to seek out more possible clues, when he suddenly heard Catlia ask heavily while hugging her knees. "Have you met her?" Klein acknowledged tersely without hiding the truth. Catlia pursed her lips and asked, "She's on the ship?" "Yes." Klein turned his head and looked at Admiral of Stars as he said in passing, "You have very deep feelings for her." Catlia's expression wasn't as lost and dazed as before. Biting her lips, she said in a self-deprecating manner, "That's right. I was by her side before I was 3. Haha, that's what they say, but I no longer have any actual memories of that. She taught me, and she held me by the hand as we adventured. She watched me grow up. To me, she's my captain and my teacher, as well as my mother." As Catlia spoke, she suddenly fell silent. Chapter 672. Bystander. Upon glancing at the silent Catlia, Klein suddenly felt a little awkward. He didn't speak again as he turned and jumped off the boulder. He walked into the black cloister through the half-opened door. In the square surrounded by a gloomy tower and the buildings, there were remnant fires from a war. Gigantic arrows were embedded in the ground, with the end of their shafts softly wobbling from the wind. Frankly was still digging and planting something, but there wasn't food by his feet anymore, but a pool of flesh and blood. "What experiments do you plan on performing on them?" Klein, who walked past, couldn't help but ask. Frank smiled in excitement. "Plenty. For example, all I need is 1 ox that can satisfy the meat requirements of an entire ship. Every time a piece of meat is sliced off, it will regrow new flesh again." "Why is it oxen again?" Klein was momentarily unable to provide a response. All he could do was silently draw the crimson moon inwardly. Along the way, he encountered Navigator Odilov, who was reading on the ground, Nina, who was almost taking off her clothes due to her inebriation, Keith Doyle, who was hiding silently in the shadows of a corner, before arriving at the hall filled with murals. At some point in time, Anderson Hood had conjured a reclining chair, and was leisurely lying on it, observing the extremely religious and holy murals on the dome. "Sigh, we're finally about to leave these cursed waters. It will just be another 2 noons and nights." Seeing Gehrman Sparrow enter, the strongest hunter sighed from the bottom of his heart. "As long as we successfully leave this area, then I'll no longer need to worry about any remnant problems." Klein originally wished to ask him to shut up, but since he was talking about himself and no one else, he couldn't be bothered. He asked in passing, "Are you from Intis?" "Barely. My father is from Intis, and my mother is from Seeger," Anderson answered, with the full intention of having a chat. Klein continued, taking a few steps forward. "Then, do you believe in the eternal blazing sun, god of steam and machinery, or the god of knowledge and wisdom?" Anderson's expression suddenly turned a little odd. "My faith was originally in the god of knowledge and wisdom, but their priests are too despicable. Just because I failed my examinations, they ignored my ordinarily handsome face, and treated me as a retard. Pooey, I'm just better at other topics. My intelligence is in no way lacking. My eye for aesthetics, and my basic foundation in drawing has always been excellent. Haha, before becoming a hunter, my dream was to be an artist. Of course, after coming to the sea, my faith is more or less in the Lord of Storms." Upon hearing Anderson's description, Klein suddenly thought of a joke. A priest from the god of knowledge and wisdom might make such a statement. He failed his examinations? This child is hopeless. Just bury him. He was about to lead the conversation into Anderson's life as a hunter, as he was the only person apart from Queen Mystic who could communicate with him normally in this dream world, when he suddenly heard the sound of a door creaking open. In the depths of the Hall of Murals, there was the sound of a door opening. Anderson just mentioned about successfully leaving these waters. Klein felt an inexplicable urge to facepalm himself, as he focused his gaze on the source of the sound. Following that, he saw a man in a short linen robe running out from the depths of the Hall of Murals, and towards them. The man had luxuriant raven-black hair, but he had wrinkles on his face, as though he had suffered plenty of hardship. "Saint of Darkness, Leo Master," Leomaster's good side. Klein recognized the man, and he immediately discovered a tall figure surface in the depths of the Hall of Murals. The figure was dressed in thick and heavy black full-body armor. His eyes emitted a deep redness. He held a huge sword as he chased after Leomaster. Clang, clang, clang. His metallic boots hit the ground repeatedly, releasing clear and hurried sounds. It's the real Leomaster, the main persona of the Saint of Darkness. Klein saw the two approaching figures, as he instinctively turned to the side and quickly retreated. He immediately held himself to the hall's wall, before realizing that Anderson Hood had leaped up from his reclining chair at some point in time, clinging close to the other side of the wall. Sensing Gehrman Sparrow's gaze, Anderson grinned, returning a smile that meant, "So you are the same as me." "Who's the same as you? This isn't cowardice. If you weren't around, I would have taken out the Sea God's scepter and fought the Saint of Darkness. I've always been considering what would happen in the real world if I were to help the good Leomaster kill the main persona in the dream. Yes, there are crew members from the future outside. If Leomaster's main persona really goes mad, Queen Mystic will definitely take action. It shouldn't be a coincidence that these two fellows left their own dreams and came here. Both parties are already very close in the real world. Perhaps someone had directed the good Leomaster over. Queen Mystic? Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Leomaster, who was dressed in short linen robes, saw the two men ahead. He had wanted to cry for help, but in the blink of an eye, he discovered that the two of them had escaped to the two ends of the hall, as though they didn't wish to partake in any of this. He desperately ran as he rushed out the Hall of Murals. The redness in the armored Leomaster's eyes darkened. He continued his pursuit, completely ignoring Klein and Anderson, who were clinging close to the mural walls. By the time they left the hall, Klein, who had some theories in mind, didn't hesitate to take a stride forward and rush out like a hunting leopard. Anderson raised his right hand and grabbed at thin air, failing to stop Gehrman Sparrow in time. This guy was still rather rational a moment ago. Why did he suddenly go mad? He discovered something. What a strange person. Anderson looked at the square outside, hesitated a few seconds, and finally chose to follow. They chased all the way out the Black Cloister, and they arrived in the region where the Admiral of Stars was. Klein saw the linen-robed Leomaster circling around the boulder to escape his evil counterpart. Then, he took the opportunity and faced the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite mountains, praying softly with ancient Hermes, the Lord that created everything. You are omnipotent and omniscient. After making another circle, the good Leomaster continued chanting. You are the source of everything great. You are the beginning and the end. You are the God of gods. You are the ruler of the vast astral world. With the honorific name spoken, the sea of clouds that separated the two mountains suddenly stirred before slowly splitting apart and revealing a deep crevice at the bottom. The shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite side suddenly sucked up the frozen dusk that was extremely distant. However, nothing happened after that. Klein seemed to figure out something as he turned his head to look at the buildings near to the Black Cloister's door. He saw that, behind a clean floor-to-ceiling window, the beautiful but distant Queen Mystic Bernadette was watching everything that was happening in silence. She was indeed the one who made the good Leomaster escape from his dream and arrive here. Since a listener from the Aurora Order was able to bring little Jack into the forsaken land of the gods, it doesn't make sense that the Saint of Darkness isn't able to do so. When there's no path ahead, and with him seeing the shadow of the giant king's court, Leomaster's split personality will definitely wish to escape into it. Hence, he demonstrated the way to enter the forsaken land of the gods to the person observing in secret. Klein retracted his gaze with great certainty. As for why Leomaster didn't succeed, he believed it was because he wasn't in the right location. He needs to be deep in those waters, and he needs to find a particular spot that is surrounded by danger and strangeness. Then, only by chanting the honorific name of the City of Silver's creator in the dream brought about by the night, will the passage that's hidden in the shadow of the giant king's court be opened. Following that, one can enter with the aid of a dream, bringing one's body and ship to transmigrate through the fog that mixes reality and illusion, so as to reach the shores of the forsaken land of the gods? Klein thought of certain possibilities. To him, the method of entering the forsaken land of the gods wasn't something he needed to care about. If he wished to do so, once he advanced to sequence 4 and truly obtained a certain level of godhood, he could get Little Sun to set up a descent or bestowment ritual for him to directly descend. However, if he used this to reverse engineer the way to leave the forsaken land of the gods, it would be extremely useful. This was priceless for the City of Silver. From the looks of it, the key to leaving the forsaken land of the gods is really in the Giant King's court. But as to what it is, there's no way of guessing it. Amidst his thoughts, pea vines rapidly grew out from the soil, instantly turning the area outside the Black Cloister into a green forest. And it also forcefully separated the Saint of Darkness's main persona and the good persona. Then Klein saw through the gaps of the pea vines that Katlia had stood up. She was no longer sitting there hugging her knees. Sizzle! Derek first did a roll before he jumped up, cleaving down at the giant's leg, which was covered in short black hair. Stimulated silver lightning smote down, causing the single-eyed monster to tremble as he stood rooted to the ground. Derek didn't miss this opportunity, as he immediately opened up his arms. Bright and pure holy light descended and enveloped the mutated giant. In the brilliance, the monster collapsed with a tragic cry as its body produced black fog. After a series of battles, Derek discovered that the monsters produced by the strange afternoon town were all afraid of intense light despite their different traits. Such an experience had allowed him to avoid injuries, allowing his teammates to keep their lives. After a while, when Colin finished the strongest monster, Afternoon Town was restored to its silence. All the lit candlelights were already extinguished. The chief of the 6-member council surveyed the area before saying with a sigh, "Let's regroup before we set up camp." At that moment, the teams that had gathered together had already been reduced to a third. There were only 6 people. Colin Iliad's true goal was actually the Giant King's court, but their encounter in Afternoon Town had made him realize that the exploration couldn't be done in haste. This was because the Giant King's court might hold deep secrets about the cataclysm, with unimaginable danger. Therefore, he needed half a year or more, perhaps even 2 years of preparation and preliminary explorations before he could attempt opening it. Chapter 673. Blood text layers of pea vines that appeared as though they were capable of weaving into a stairway into heaven dropped and shrank back into the soil. Be it the Saint of Darkness's main persona, or Leah Master's good side, they vanished. Only Katlia stood at the top of the boulder, surveying her surroundings with a blank look. Queen Mystic threw Leah Master's main and good side back into his own dream? Or did she pull them elsewhere in an attempt to understand the unique traits necessary for entering the forsaken land of the gods? It seems like it's impossible to pull these 2 personalities into different dreams. Otherwise, Queen Mystic would have long conversed with the good Leo Master individually, as well as agreed to help him defeat the devil in exchange for relevant information, without going through so much trouble. Of course, to truly kill off the Saint of Darkness's main persona, perhaps one will have to enter the dangerous ruins in the real world. Even Queen Mystic wouldn't dare to attempt it, as it might produce an evil queen who abides by, "Do as you wish, and do as much harm." Klein turned his head once again in thought, looking at the nearby buildings around the Black Cloister's door. He saw that the figure belonging to Bernadette had vanished behind the clear floor-to-ceiling windows. Klein didn't attempt to seek her out to figure out if Queen Mystic had obtained more information from Leah Master's good side. This was because he remembered Gehrman Sparrow's core persona, Mr. Fool's Blessed. An Admiral of Stars knew very well that, in Mr. Fool's tarot gathering, the sun came from the City of Silver in the forsaken land of the gods. To say that Mr. Fool didn't know the method of entering the forsaken land of the gods was unbelievable. Therefore, as a blessed, Gehrman Sparrow definitely lacked the motivation to delve deep into the matter. There are many matters where the case is true that a persona, which brings you success, will also make you fail. This is a flaw for Faceless. Klein retracted his gaze and looked back at the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite mountain, only to realize that the frozen sunset was slowly returning to the horizon. On the same mountain, the boulder remained standing as Katlia slowly sat down again, hugging her knees. Noon and night switched thrice, but the actual amount of time that had passed in the outside world was just the daytime of a single day. The future circled around the dangerous ruins and dodged the latent dangers hidden in the safe sea routes, before finally arriving near the entrance of those waters. Klein and company once again saw the ruin, which was mostly submerged with seawater from the very beginning. They saw the gray stones and columns, as well as the huge dome at the top. Previously, they could hear loud and clear panting sounds. Bloodless had even painfully pointed out that a corpse was hidden in those ruins. And that corpse was very likely to be the source of the panting. At that moment, the ruin that hid immense danger no longer brought fear to the people on board the Future, but joy. This was because it meant that they were about to leave the ridiculous and terrifying waters. At some point in time, Nina had already climbed up to the tall crow's nest and said loudly as she looked at the ruin, there's a ship. Ship. Klein circled around Anderson Hood, who was blocking him, and approached the shipboard as he focused. Indeed, on the right of the stacked stones and stone columns, there was an ordinary three-mast sailboat docked by it. As there was something in the way, it would be difficult for the people on board the Future to notice it if they weren't viewing it from a high vantage point or looking carefully. The sailboat floated there without a single sailor on board. The silence made it terrifying. It's as though it was all eaten by the ruin. Anderson came over and shook his head with a sigh. In these waters, one mustn't go close unless one knows the ruins well. A person who dares outline the mural of an angel of fate doesn't have the right to say that. Your treasure hunting team claimed to be rich in experience, but in the end, aren't you the only one left from it? Klein didn't turn his head as he lampooned. At this moment, Katlia also came to the deck as she looked at the sailboat docked by the ruin. During this entire process, she didn't give Gehrman Sparrow a glance. It was as though he didn't exist. After a brief moment of silence, Katlia raised her hand to remove the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. The deep purple hue in her eyes swirled, as though she was trying to outline one complex symbol after another. A pair of eyes suddenly appeared above the empty sailboat. They were a pair of illusory, translucent dark purple eyes. The pair of eyes slowly moved and circled the deck once before entering the cabin. This Beyonder power is very useful. Speaking of which, based on the means demonstrated by Queen Mystic and Admiral of Stars, the Beyonder powers of a mystery prior has some of the highlights of fairy tales. Man, will Queen Mystic be able to turn people into frogs? Also, is the mystery prying of a mystery prior demonstrated here, on their eyes? Admiral of Stars' eyes are somewhat odd. I have to take note. Klein silently made a guess, as he awaited the outcome of Katlia's remote exploration. After a while, the dark purple hue in Katlia's eyes finally dimmed. She rubbed her brows, wore her glasses again, and said to Anderson Hood and Frank Lee, "There's a problem inside." As she spoke, she took out a handful of colorful powder from her classic warlock robe, and she suddenly threw them outwards. The powder didn't scatter onto the ground, and instead formed a realistic color picture. The picture's background appeared like a captain's cabin. There was a picture on the desk and a portrait on the wall, both depicting the same person. He was a man from Faceac, with broad shoulders, light blonde hair and deep blue eyes. Klein first found it familiar, before he recalled where he had seen the man before. Back when he was in Nas, an adventurer had been pursued by the second mate of the King of Immortality, Curtius, and ran into the Lairdal Bar to seek help from the members of the Adventurer Association. At that instant, among the powerhouses who stood up to provide protection was a muscular man from Faceac, who was more than 2 meters tall. Klein had found him rather strong, and placed him at sequence 6 at the very least. Why would his ship suddenly enter these waters? And why would he rashly explore a dangerous ruin? Amidst Klein's puzzlement, he carefully observed the supernatural picture on the deck. This time, he saw a pool of blood on the floor, and beside the blood were a few words in Faceac. The Fountain of Unaging. The last character had a drawn-out mark of blood before it was connected to clear smudges that extended out towards the door. Klein's mind seemed capable of restoring the actual scene. The Sequence 6 Faceac man had suffered a sudden attack and fell to the ground heavily injured. He tried his best to write down the source of his encounter, but just as finished the first few words, he was held by the legs or head by some unknown entity, and he was forcibly pulled away. Considering how the red words weren't wiped away, Klein suspected that the entity that dragged the adventurer away wasn't a living person. It should be the corpse of that ruin, he thought, feeling a headache. The Fountain of Unaging? They came here in search of the Fountain of Unaging? Anderson had said in excitement. Clearly, but they didn't find it. Frank Lee shook his head in great disappointment. He also looked forward to the Fountain of Unaging, believing that the fountain's waters could create qualitative changes to his various experiments. The Fountain of Unaging. Slaughterer Curtius was the one chasing after the young adventurer back then. He's the second mate of the King of Immortality. Rumor has it that the King of Immortality had once drunk the waters of the Fountain of Unaging. Curtius even warned me, Gairman Sparrow, to not interfere with the young adventurer's matters, claiming that it was the will of the King of Immortality. Klein barely reproduced the truth, based on various tidbits of information. The young adventurer obtained the secret of the Fountain of Unaging from one of the King of Immortality's aides, and he was thus pursued. Later, with the protection of some of the stronger members of the Adventurer Association, he barely escaped from Slaughterer Curtius. Later, to hide from the King of Immortality, and also to seek out the Fountain of Unaging, they finally chose to adventure into these waters. Who knew that they ended up being wiped out in that ruin? Could it be that the Fountain of Unaging is hidden deep in that ruin? Klein looked at the stacked gray stones and stone columns, as he vaguely made a prediction. As he temporarily had no way to verify his theory, nor did he know whose corpse was buried there, he didn't have the urge to explore or take risks. He rationally retracted his gaze. I can ask will a Septon or a Rhodes? Perhaps the Fountain of Unaging is the pus produced from that rotting corpse. Klein guessed with the most nefarious of thoughts. At this moment Katlia, who heard Anderson's and Frank's conversation, thought and said, if their death was caused by their search for the Fountain of Unaging, I do not believe that the owner of the portrait and picture would have the motivation to leave behind accurate information before his death. After all, the people who actually find him here wouldn't be his family. Makes sense. If I were in his shoes, and if I encounter a monster in my treasure-seeking adventures, I wouldn't think of providing any hints to others before my death. Klein indiscernibly shook his head, failing to think of any reason for the time being. Katlia looked at Anderson and Frank, who wore looks of anticipation. A successful adventure is a result of having detailed intel and sufficient preparation, but we lack all of that now. Her voice suddenly turned loud as it resounded in every corner of the ship. Continue sailing. Leave these waters. Aye, aye, Captain. Nina, who was on the crow's nest, gulped a mouthful of beer. A few minutes later, the descent and ascent that violated common sense happened once again, but the prepared members on the Future were no longer in a sorry state like before. They easily overcame the stimulating scene of jumping over the ravine and being sent flying. Soon, the Future landed over blue seas, and a distance away was a gigantic storm blotting out the sky. Not far away, there was another ship floating there silently. It was 200 meters long, its front and back curved up, making it look like a crescent. Upon seeing the flag depicting the black tombstone, Klein's mind flashed with the corresponding name. The Death Announcer. It was the flagship of the King of Immortality Agalito. At this moment, Klein no longer felt fear and horror, but excitement and agitation. With Queen Mystic on board, and with no need to hide this time, she, together with me, Admiral of Stars, Anderson Hood, and the crew of the Future will have the chance of wiping out the crew of the King of Immortality. Food for creeping hunger has been found. I've found a candidate for a marionette. At this moment, the Death Announcer suddenly turned around, moving away at an unprecedented speed. I had fled. Klein instantly wore a blank look. Soon, The death announcer had vanished from his line of sight. Chapter 674. Leaving the ship that was way too fast. I just had the thought. Klein looked at the undulating surface of the sea, temporarily unable to gather his thoughts. Amidst his thoughts, he came up with a theory. King of Immortality Agolito's second mate, Slaughterer Curtius, is suspected to be a devil or even a desire apostle. He possesses the beyonder powers to detect danger ahead of time, and the ability to lock onto the source of the danger. Then, would the King of Immortality be a sequence 4 demigod of the devil pathway to begin with? That's why once the crew of the future possessed the actual strength to deal harm to him with an actual plan in mind, he immediately sensed the problem and discovered the existence of Queen Mystic. So he didn't hesitate to retreat? Yes, this means Queen Mystic also had the intention of taking action. Otherwise, my thoughts would have only made King of Immortality sneer and retaliate crazily. Sigh, this beyonder power of the devil pathway is just too useful. Trying to ensnare the King of Immortality, or his first mate, second mate, or third mate is quite impossible. Klein thought regretfully as he looked at Anderson Hood. The strongest hunter still showed a clear, warped expression, as though reeling in despair that his bad luck hadn't decreased. He was also surprised that the death announcer would flee with its tail between its legs, as though it wasn't going according to the script in his mind. He darted his eyes as he looked around with a guess, seemingly coming to a conclusion. Unfortunately, Anderson's bad luck isn't strong enough. Otherwise, he can be sacrificed in order to bait the King of Immortality. Haha, isn't that the correct usage of a provoker? Klein turned into the corridor and returned to his room. Just as he pushed open the wooden door, he saw a familiar back standing before his window. She had a very proportionate figure and was dressed slightly oddly. She was none other than Queen Mystic Bernadette. Ma'am, did your father not teach you? You shouldn't enter someone's room without permission, especially the room of a male stranger? As a lady who was brought up in a noble family, you should have been waiting by the door and earnestly request permission to enter. Emperor, didn't you recall the books on education? Klein silently lampooned as he closed the door in passing. Without waiting for him to say a word, Bernadette said to him with her back facing him, "The matters from before have verified a theory of mine." What theory? Klein repressed his curiosity as he asked with a deadpan expression. Bernadette didn't turn her head as she looked out at the calm sea surface. Agolito's fountain of unaging is a scam. If there really is a fountain of unaging, it would have been one of the main ingredients of a demoness of unaging, or it would be something that would be produced from their corpses. Therefore, any man who claims to have drank from the fountain of unaging is lying. She didn't explain what a demoness of unaging was, seemingly certain that Gehrman Sparrow knew what it was. And even if he didn't know, he would have the means of figuring it out later. Fountain of unaging. Demoness of unaging. It does match. So the bloody text on that sailboat beside the ruin is to tell the world that the fountain of unaging is a scam? King of Immortality Agolito has released news of the fountain of unaging again and again in order to lure adventurers and pirates to enter dangerous waters and die, or to take the opportunity to slaughter them. It has strong vibes of a devil. It's no wonder Slaughterer Curtius warned me not to interfere. Klein thought for a few seconds and deliberately said in a ruminative tone, "Scam." Queen Mystic Bernadette nodded and said with a gentle tone, "This might be part of the ritual that Agolito needs for his advancement to Sequence 4. It might also be an action needed to digest the Sequence 4 potion." She paused as though making a silent sigh. Then she said, "That's because the Sequence 4 of his pathway is demon." Demon? Sounds deceitful. Creating a treasure scam to harm others. That does match the style of a demon. Klein was instantly enlightened. At this moment, Queen Mystic turned around as she cast her gaze through her checkered black veil and towards Gehrman Sparrow's eyes. "It's my turn to provide information?" Klein deliberated for 2 seconds. According to the analysis of limited diary entries, Emperor Roselle suffered an extreme predicament in his later years. This forced him to come up with the idea of attempting something crazy. In this aspect he was extremely frank. This was because the diary entries he had received up to date didn't reveal what Emperor Roselle wished to do in his later years, what predicament he was in, or what crazy action he did. Therefore, by providing this piece of information, he was hinting to Bernadette that to know the truth, she had to hand over the diary entries of Emperor Roselle's critical period to Admiral of Stars Catlia. Bernadette remained silent for a few seconds. As the dark clouds moved through the sky, allowing the sunlight to shine from the outside, the queen that reigned over the 5 seas suddenly dissociated like bubbles, shattering and disappearing. The light refracted from the bubbles had produced different colors, filling the room with a fairy tale-like dreamscape. If not for the hidden sage, the mystery prior pathway is really interesting. Klein reflected as he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice. He activated his vision of spirit body threads, but he didn't discover any additional black threads. This meant that Bernadette had already left. Phew. Klein silently sighed and quickly deactivated the vision. Just as he was about to lie in bed to take a rest, he heard brisk footsteps approach. Knock. 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 Someone knocked at his door. Who is it? Klein sat up. It's me. Catlia's voice sounded. Klein went over, feeling puzzled as he opened the door. He didn't ask what it was about as he coldly looked at her, his gaze expressing everything. Catlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge and said, "Coming out from those waters doesn't bring us back to where we entered. We are less than 100 nautical miles away from Toscarter Island. It will take about 3 days to Nas. Where do you wish to return to? The entrance and exit are different?" Klein was surprised as he asked in a confirming manner. "Then, is it possible to enter those waters from this place?" "No, we will directly fall into that bottomless ravine of the ocean. According to the results of divination, the people who did so are dead in the true sense of the word," Catlia explained simply. "Is that so?" Klein thought before saying, "To Toscarter Island." The reason why he didn't choose Nas was because they were close to the next tarot gathering. He didn't wish to do something that took plenty of time on the future. Furthermore, Toscarter Island was the easternmost colony of the Lone Kingdom. The currency used was pence, solely and gold pounds. Klein no longer needed to consider the problem of foreign exchange. All right. Catlia had no views on this. Watching her turn and walk to the captain's cabin, Klein shook his head slightly and sighed inwardly. If you had come earlier, you would have met Queen Mystic. In the evening, the future arrived at the port of Toscarter Island as it forcefully docked there. Klein dressed up as a gentleman, carried his leather suitcase, and came to the deck. He then handed over the final payment placed in his 2 pockets to Admiral of Stars Catlia. After subtracting the pugilist beyonder characteristics worth £700, it was a total of £1,300. As such, Klein's wealth was reduced to £8,436 and 5 gold coins. Catlia received it in silence and opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something. But she ultimately didn't say a word. "Are you getting off here? Or are you going somewhere else?" She turned to look at Anderson Hood. Realizing that Gehrman Sparrow was about to leave, and that he was on a pirate ship with him hunting several pirates in the past, Anderson immediately smiled. "I'll get off here. You can now make payment." Catlia didn't spare him just because Anderson had borrowed clothes from the pirates. "All right." Anderson didn't hide his heart-aching expression as he reached out and pulled off an ordinary button in the middle of his shirt. Reluctantly, he handed it over. "This is what I acquired from those waters. It's from the corpse that originated from an explorer from the Lone Military. I'm not sure of its original name, and I can only call it by its corresponding sequence 6, due to the powers it exhibits. Yes, Judge. Its negative effects aren't especially strong. It makes its wearer easily offend people or monsters. Perhaps one might end up being targeted by a demigod. This isn't something you can call not especially strong. If I were Admiral of Stars, I would have chosen that sword of yours." Klein lampooned as he watched Catlia receive Anderson's payment for the boat ride. He didn't bother with their affairs as he lifted his suitcase and left the future, arriving at the pier of Toscarter Island. Bang! Anderson had leaped off the deck and landed beside him. "Let's get some drinks." to celebrate our departure from those cursed waters. The hunter invited him with excitement in a relaxed manner. Klein swept his glance at him, refusing his offer with his eyes. All he wanted was to put a distance between him and this fellow, who had bad luck and a provocative halo. All right. Anderson looked to his sides, cleared his throat and said, "Can you lend me money? As you know, everything that I had has sunken in those waters." Having said that, he laughed. "Don't worry. I'll return what I owe tomorrow morning. There are plenty of pirates in Toscarter's bars and brothels. I plan on getting them to sponsor me a little. Extort those without bounties while cashing out those with bounties?" Klein sked inwardly and handed him a 5 soldi note. "That little," Anderson said with his mouth agape. "It's enough for your drinks, meals, and hotel," Klein calmly replied. "Besides, this is £1 in cash." £1? Anderson rubbed his eyes and said with a helpless smile, "All right, it's £1. I'll return £1 to you tomorrow morning." Chapter 675. Building ties. Afraid that Gehrman Sparrow would go back on his word, Anderson grabbed the 5 soldi note as scenes of ordinary beef, sizzling over flames and alcohol beverages without any additional sedatives surfaced in his mind. Well, this fellow actually accepted it. I was just saying it in passing in order to accentuate my persona, as well as to let him understand that it isn't so easy to borrow money from me so as to prevent him from hunting pirates and returning to the Fog Sea after borrowing a huge sum of money. Klein mumbled inwardly. To him, a Sequence 5 hunter wouldn't starve or have nowhere to stay when placed in a place with plenty of pirates, even if he didn't have a single penny. He indiscernibly shook his head and was about to leave the dock when he suddenly heard a boorish shout. "Gehrman!" Upon hearing Frank Lee's voice, Klein shuddered as he turned around, his nerves taut. The first mate of the future, the poison expert with the £7,000 bounty, stood by the shipboard and held his hands to his mouth. As though broadcasting his voice, he asked, "Where will you be most of the time? Where should I write letters to? I wish to share with you the latest results of my research." "I don't wish to know. This fellow probably doesn't have many friends. And I dare to be one of the many people he thinks of as friends, but doesn't treat him as one. Yes, Admiral of Stars is still inclined towards Queen Mystic, and she lacks belonging to the Tarot Club. To openly develop a snitch at her side, no, a source of intelligence. It helps in my shock and awe tactic towards her. And it's a kind of Gehrman Sparrow level punishment imposed on her. With this as a bedrock, it would be reasonable and natural for Mr. Fool to punish her." Klein's thoughts raced as he took out a notepad and fountain pen used for divinations from his pocket. He scribbled down the summoning ritual needed to summon his messenger, and he didn't forget to include the additional requirement of a gold coin. With a whoosh, Klein flicked his wrist, sending the note flying at Frank Lee like a dart, landing accurately in his hand. "Excellent." Frank Lee glanced at the information on the piece of paper and waved his hand in delight. Klein didn't delay any further as he picked up his leather suitcase, left the dock, and began searching for a hotel. During this process, he was originally very adamant about objecting to Anderson's request to stay in the same hotel, but on second thought, he agreed to it. He was afraid that this fellow who was plagued with bad luck would get into trouble again, bringing about a disaster to the innocent guests and attendant. Therefore, he decided to monitor him up close and decisively handle the problem if required. After checking in, Anderson went into his room with his key. Bang! He sat down on a reclining chair, as though a heavy burden was released. After leaving those dangerous waters, he finally felt like he was human again. He didn't need to worry about suddenly dying. After he laid there silently for a while, Anderson had slowly got up. He took out a flask that had an outer lining made of iron, flipped over a glass cup, and poured himself some hot water. He believed that he should recollect himself and begin visiting the bars. After drinking some alcohol and filling his stomach, he could seek out some sponsors. After the hot water cooled a little, Anderson raised his cup and gulped it down comfortably. Suddenly, he coughed intensely as his face turned a little purple. Cough, cough, cough. Anderson reached for his throat, but he didn't seem capable of taking a single breath. With a crashing sound, the glass cup fell to the floor from his hand, shattering across the ground. Cough, cough, cough. Anderson's coughing weakened as his face turned purple. At that moment, his eyes seemed to produce a spark as the veins on the back of his hands squirmed like they were alive. Bang! Anderson fell to the ground, convulsing a little before becoming motionless. His breathing even seemed to come to a halt. Seconds later, the corpse-like Anderson suddenly got up as he rubbed his face in fear. Damn it, I almost choked to death from drinking water. If that really happened, then I might be the hunter with the most laughable cause of death. Thankfully, I bought this item at great cost before entering those waters. It finally came in handy today. As he spoke, Anderson took out a doll formed of straw from a secret pocket in his vest. Ink was used to simply draw 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. The doll's surface had already been corroded as pitch-black liquid dripped down, drop after drop. In about 8 seconds, it was completely reduced to a liquid, turning into a stain on the floor. My bad luck hasn't decreased at all, and it has even gotten worse. Man, Gehrman Sparrow once told me of a prophecy, saying that the most lethal danger often lies in day-to-day life. Anderson paced about as he carefully avoided the glass fragments at his feet, afraid that it would cause him another death. No, I need to save myself. I need to save myself. Anderson pulled open the door and carefully walked out. He came straight to Klein's room, reached out his finger, and rapped on the door. Soon the wooden door, which was neither too solid or hard, opened without a sound. Gehrman Sparrow, who had only taken off his coat, appeared before Anderson. Anderson forced a smile and said, "Are you pleasantly surprised?" Creak. The door closed right in front of him. He was first stunned before he muttered to himself with a stiff expression, "I should change the way I talk." Thump, thump, thump. He knocked on Klein's door again. The door quickly opened as a revolver was pointed at him. "Haha, I just wanted to ask if you know any Beyonders who can improve my luck." Anderson raised his hands midway, wildly hinting for Gehrman Sparrow to provide him with the details of the powerhouse that informed him of the prophecy. Too late. I've no idea where Queen Mystic is. She didn't leave me a way to contact her? But since my messenger's summoning ritual is known to Frank Lee, it also means Admiral of Stars knows of it. And that means Bernadette knows of it. Also, after returning to Backlund, I can seek out Miss Sharon's help. Queen Mystic is in her circles, even though the frequency of her appearance isn't high. Klein gave Anderson a look of pity. He wasn't fond of this strongest hunter, often mocking him inwardly and expressing all kinds of nefarious thoughts towards him. After all, Anderson was partially responsible for him losing his cufflink. However, it was only limited to his thoughts. He had no intentions of actually putting it into practice. If Anderson truly sought his help, he similarly wouldn't reject him. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "I can help you ask, and I'll give you the answer tomorrow morning. But I suspect you don't have the means to pay me. I'll go make my rounds at the bars later. Furthermore, I have plenty of stashes in the Fog Sea," Anderson replied without hesitation. Klein nodded, and as he closed the door he said, "Meet you tomorrow morning. I hope you can survive until then." Creak. The door was locked once again. "Is that a curse, or was he wishing me luck?" Anderson whispered with a wry smile. "According to my experience, there probably wouldn't be any accidents in the next 2 to 3 days." Inside the room, Klein returned to his desk. On it was a letter that already had the introduction written, as well as an unfolded paper crane. In regards to Anderson's problem, Klein had already thought of a target to ask before he even agreed. There was no doubt that to resolve the means of a snake of fate, questioning another snake of fate was the best solution. He pondered over the space that was available after unfolding the paper crane, and the questions he would like to ask before writing a draft in his mind. Finally, he raised his pencil and wrote, "How should the bad luck curse from an Angel of Fate mural be removed? What's the name of the sequence 4 potion for the seer pathway? Where can the formula and main ingredients be obtained?" Putting down the pencil, Klein carefully scrutinized the questions before carefully folding the paper crane according to the folds and placing it in his wallet. After doing all of this, he continued writing to Mr. Azek. In the letter, Klein first mentioned that he received the help of Admiral of Stars in entering the dangerous easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, successfully completed the ritual, and changing gears, he mentioned his encounter with Admiral Hell Ludwell's inexplicable attack mid-journey, and how he nearly suffered terrible losses. While on this topic, he began describing the ring on Admiral Hell's hand, which was suspected to be a relic from ancient death. He asked very subtly if Mr. Azek had any recollection of it, or if he needed to obtain it to study it, so as to invoke more memories. After mentioning this, Klein mentioned in a casual manner about the artificial death project by the numinous episcopate, as well as asking this big shot if it was feasible, or if there were any records that recorded the actual details. Finally, he mentioned how he didn't know the subsequent sequences of his pathway, and he didn't know how to obtain those opportunities. Klein began providing a description of the summary of things to take note of from traveling through those dangerous waters. This was to provide Mr. Azek information, so as to prevent him from suddenly wishing to seek out the remnant aura of ancient death, without realizing the lurking dangers. Rumor has it that those waters are filled with the ravings of the true creator. The higher the sequence, the clearer one will hear it, making it easier to be influenced and resulting in madness or a loss of control. This is demarcated by sequence 4. But a small number of demigods have found the means to act freely there, Klein wrote at the end of his letter. After folding the paper, he picked up Azek's copper whistle and summoned the huge skeleton messenger. The messenger burrowed out from the ground and politely looked at Klein from a level height before opening his palm. Not bad, Klein praised silently and handed the letter over. Then, he brushed his teeth and took a bath before comfortably getting into bed. After an unknown period of time, he found himself awake in a dream, and he saw the desolate plains and pitch-black steeple. Familiarly walking into the depths of the steeple, Klein discovered Will Acceptan's reply among the scattered tarot cards. Friendly reminder, the paper crane is about to tear. The bad luck curse brought about by the mural can be resolved by Ricardo. High sequence formulas for the seer pathway can only be obtained from the crazy Zeratul or the Hornaces mountain range. If you are the blessed of the Evernight, treat it as though I didn't say it. Sequence 4 of the seer pathway is Arcane Sorcerer. Chapter 676, Tripartite Transaction Bizarro Sorcerer. Klein suddenly woke up from his dream, as he opened his eyes to see the dark night. It's not noon yet. It's still very dangerous, he mumbled before returning back to sleep. At this moment, he finally recalled that he had already left those dangerous waters. He wouldn't vanish or go missing if he wasn't sleeping at the end of the night. Phew, it's this kind of stable environment that's good. I have to say that mysteriously vanishing, due to not sleeping after dark, is something that can be used to scare kids, making them not dare to sleep late. I was often scared by such stories when I was young. Klein sat up, walked to the desk, and poured himself a cup of water. After a moment of silence, he gulped down a mouthful of water, as he gradually recovered his ability to think. Zeratul really went mad. What exactly did he encounter, or what happened to him? Bizarro Sorcerer. Sequence 4 is called Bizarro Sorcerer. The seer pathway's main focus is on being tricky, crafty, pranky, and paranormal? Or should it directly be summarized as being bizarre? Yes, clown, magician, faceless, and marionettist do give me such a feeling. Seer appears to be an exception, but in the eyes of others, the style of a charlatan might appear rather strange and terrifying at times. That's why Zeratul said that fate isn't the main domain of this pathway. Also, it's clear that beyonders of this pathway are more inclined to being spellcasters. According to Will Acceptan's explanation, there are 3 methods to obtaining the potion formula to Bizarro Sorcerer. 1. Seek out the secret order and find the mad Zeratul. 2. Head to the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range and find the treasures left behind by the Antigonus family. 3. Obtain it from the church. For example, that Antigonus family's notebook might contain the corresponding formula. But each one of these three options is more dangerous than the other. According to Emperor Rosel's description, Zeratul was a Sequence 2 miracle invoker a long time ago, a true angel. Later, he even advanced to Sequence 1. He's equal or slightly weaker than a king of angels. The crazy him might have gone mad, but it's likely that he will be more difficult to deal with. At the very least, there's no possibility of me convincing or tricking him. Even in terms of pure strength, I wouldn't be Zeradul's match even if I employed Mr. Azek's help. Haha. Unless I wait for Will Septon to be born. But if he were to involve himself in this matter, there's a small chance of him incurring the attention of Angel of Fate Ouroboros. As for the treasure on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, the resounding ravings, the setup of the Antigonus family, and the rumors of the nation of the Evernight buried in the depths of mystery, they make me feel that it isn't a simple matter. I suspect it's likely to be a trap. I don't even need to consider the Church of the Goddess. Ignoring the fact that the Holy Cathedral has angels presiding over it, as well as a bunch of Grade 0 sealed artifacts. Just the Backlund diocese where the Antigonus family's notebook has a terrifying demigod. Klein couldn't help but recall Mr. A, who had been erased like a pencil drawing. And the one that executed all of that was likely to be one of the upper echelons of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. A beautiful lady whose eyes lack spirituality. She even smiled at me. I've no idea what it means. Klein shook his head in resignation, believing that he only had one course of action that he had at present. That was to find a demigod from the secret order, who was still considered normal. Compared to the mad Zeradul, I can communicate with them at least, or even deal with them. Just Klein alone was impossible, but he could seek Mr. Azek's help or Queen Mystic Bernadette's help at a certain price. I can only consider this for now. Klein rapidly turned his thoughts back on how to help Anderson hood rid the bad luck curse. It's been more than 2 months. I wonder if Fate Counselor Ricardo has left Orvie Island. Sigh. He hasn't summoned my messenger all this time to inform me of clues to the mystical item I seek. However, it's not a big problem. Bellman Carnot definitely hasn't left his post. I can contact Counselor Ricardo through him. That's good too. The Life School of Thought hasn't completed the request up to now, meaning that they haven't made their final payment. They can pay it off by changing Anderson's luck for the better. Then I can receive the payment from Anderson. Heh. When it comes to a mystical item or sealed artifact which possesses immense offensive powers, isn't Anderson's sword one? According to the traits showcased by Reaper, I can ignore the item formed after he dies. I'm not some greedy demon either. I'll definitely pay additional fees to tide him over. Klein wiped away his mischievous thoughts and took out the paper crane from his wallet. After unfolding it, he carefully erased the pencil marks on it. It's really about to tear. I can use it another 2 times at best, he muttered sadly. Then, he folded the paper crane and returned to his bed to continue sleeping. As for using the radio transceiver to contact Rhodes, he planned on doing so after leaving this pirate's playground. After daybreak, Klein languidly got up and slowly washed up, believing that this was how life should be. Thump, thump, thump. The knocking on the door interrupted his state of wistfulness. Without his acumen for danger, his spiritual intuition told him that it was Anderson Hood. As expected of the strongest hunter, he successfully survived up to now. Klein sked and controlled his expressions before opening the door. Anderson was wearing a deer hunting cap of unknown origin. He grinned as he handed him a lone gold coin. What I owe you from yesterday? Klein received the gold coin and measured its weight in his hand. There's an answer to your problem. Anderson's eyes lit up. What's the solution? Don't tell me that the answer is that there are no solutions. Am I such a person? I'll just say that it's hopeless, so just wait for your death. Goodbye. Klein lampooned as he swept Anderson with an indifferent gaze. A demigod that's good at changing one's luck stays in Orvie Island. He owes me a favor. Excellent. Anderson didn't hide his joy. So what sort of payment must I make? Very sensible of you. Klein deliberately fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, I need a mystical item with powerful offensive abilities. Do you have any clues? If the value exceeds that of the luck enhancement ritual, I will pay the difference. Anderson frowned bit by bit before easing them. He said with a smile, I have a mystical item that matches your request. It has a beyonder power that can deal lethal damage. The negative effects aren't bad either. You will still be able to eat and sleep while having some bad luck, easily attracting monsters and enemies. Occasionally, you will be talkative and be a little off-putting. Haha, it's a joke. To be frank, my death brachydont is the mystical item you need, but it's the only weapon I have left. I do have one relevant clue. It's a rather special revolver. The bullets it shoots have the effects of weakness attack, lethal attack, and a slaughtering effect. Furthermore, it can be matched with bullets of different characteristics. The negative effects include developing a weakness that originally didn't exist after every use, such as the fear of light, the fear of ships, the fear of dogs, etc. And such a weakness will last for 6 hours. There's almost no negative effects when having it on you. It just makes you easily thirsty. This is something completely tolerable. If not for the characteristics of the revolver overlapping with my abilities, and the mystical items I have, then I would have bought it back then. The seller is offering it for £9,000. So, the total price would be £1,500, and the clues to the revolver. How about that? Sounds very suitable. Besides, it fits my combat habits. Klein didn't directly agree as he asked in return. £1,500. Haha, I found more than 10 pirates yesterday. They were all very kind, contributing all their wallets to me. Otherwise, they would lend me their characteristics and heads. In just one night, I received £1,600. Seriously, I love this pirate's paradise. Anderson said with a beaming smile. I have to keep £100 for myself for the ship tickets to return to the Fog Sea, so all I can do is pay you £1,500. Earning £1,600 a night? Not only are there many pirates in Toscarter, but they are either worth a lot or have plenty of money. Klein suddenly had thoughts about staying a few more nights in the port city. But considering how the easily cacheable and locatable targets had mostly been finished off by Anderson, what was left was definitely not easy. He felt depressed again as he coldly asked, Aren't you afraid of being a target of revenge for doing something like that in a pirate's playground? What's there to worry about? I'm not afraid, even if they're subordinates of a pirate admiral. Haha, I believe you're the same. If they're men of the Four Kings, that's not a big problem either. We're about to leave, and the propagation of information takes time. By the time they come, I'd have changed ships and identities several times. Anderson said without much concern. Why are you cursing yourself again? Klein silently swept him a look of pity. Deal. Haha, here's £300. You'll have to wait for the remaining £1,200. That's when the bounty rewards and characteristic money arrive. Don't worry, it will definitely come today. It's not a lot. Anderson took out a thick wallet filled with plenty of Soli bills and handed them to Klein. In consideration of his persona, Klein only did a simple count before stuffing the cash into his wallet and pockets. He said without emotion, Buy 2 tickets to Orvie for tomorrow. He didn't deliberately exhort Anderson to buy them with a different identity, as he believed that the hunter across him was mature and experienced. If he's lacking in experience and strength, with the way he does things, he would have long been buried in some sea. Klein couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. All right. Anderson pointed at the floor. Breakfast together? My treat. Klein nodded without refusing him. Once they arrived downstairs, the two sat at a table near the window. Midway, a waiter brought white porcelain cups and teaspoons over. Just as they interacted, the waiter's gaze suddenly turned adrift. He picked up the teaspoon and stabbed it at Anderson's throat without any warning. Although Anderson was surprised, his reaction was in no way slow. He immediately leaned backward and dodged the sudden strike. Bang! Not far away, the hotel's boss suddenly shot at Anderson's dodging body. What am I doing? After the gunshot, the boss muttered with a look of alarm and blankness. Chapter 677. Falling to the ground amidst the gunshot, Anderson's body suddenly collapsed to the floor, using an amusing manner to dodge the bullet. As for Klein, who didn't fully understand the situation, he jumped to the side and activated his spirit vision while pulling out his revolver. At that instant, his first reaction was that Anderson had gone overboard in his hunting last night and was now the target of revenge. He only wished to shout, "I don't know him. It has nothing to do with me." At the table beside Anderson Hood, a stout man dressed in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves threw forks and knife, and he suddenly drew an already loaded double-barreled hunting rifle, aimed at the ground, and pulled the trigger from a commanding height. These series of actions were nearly simultaneous with the hotel's boss, but they were simply one step slower due to the many steps involved. Bang! The scattershot sprayed out countless tiny shrapnel, riddling the ground with holes. Although Anderson had dodged in time and avoided most of the blast, he was still struck by a portion of the shrapnel as his sides were immediately left mangled. Just as Klein was about to kill the stout man with the double-barreled hunting rifle to help Anderson Hood get out of danger, he realized that the man suddenly turned blank, just like the hotel's boss. He was then filled with alarm and horror, as though he had jolted out of his stupor. That's not right. They're not the true assailants. Klein rationally stopped attempting to pull the trigger. He quickly swept his gaze across the restaurant. Discovering nothing with his spirit vision, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice, activating his spirit body thread's vision. At this moment, all the ladies and gentlemen in the restaurant had stood up in a fluster due to the sudden shootout. All of them were rushing for the exit. When passing by the tumbling Anderson, an elegantly dressed lady with pretty good looks suddenly paused. She released the dark-colored glass bottle she held in her hand and poured it at the strongest hunter. Sizzle! Anything that was splashed by the liquid rapidly turned black as it suffered intense corrosion. Anderson covered his face and leaped up, dodging this attack once again. Immediately following that, a gentle and cute lady, a gentleman with newspapers, a red-vested waiter, and a 5-year-old child whose hands were stained with sweets attacked Anderson Hood in all kinds of manners. Flour, lit matchsticks, fruit knives, boiling coffee and concentrated alcohol beverages inundated him, as almost everyone in the hotel's restaurant seemed to have one goal: kill Anderson Hood. In this abnormally dangerous situation without any beyonder powers involved, Anderson, who had been surrounded with no way to escape, employed an array of actions. Leaping up, sending tables flying, igniting items ahead of time, barely managing to avoid suffering damage to any vital spot, and didn't suffer any serious damage. Meanwhile, Klein also noticed something abnormal. In a corner of the restaurant which was blocked by a decorative cabinet, there was clearly thin, illusory black spirit body threads extending from it, but it was silent over there. In this chaotic and panic-stricken restaurant, it appeared especially abnormal. The true assailant who planned the passers-by murder case is sitting over there? From the confusion, puzzlement, horror, and fluster that the hotel's boss, waiters, and guests exhibited after attacking Anderson, they didn't become marionettes. This is another kind of control, an illusion, an emotion seed of a desire apostle, or could it be an influence on one's psyche? Klein suddenly had an idea light up in his mind. He immediately took 2 steps forward and sent a customer who still had butter on the corner of his lips flying, opening up a pathway for Anderson Hood. The strongest hunter immediately somersaulted out of the encirclement via the path that was opened up, and he ran up to the hotel's 2nd floor. Then, with his back to the wall on the corner of the staircase, he gasped for air. Has my provocative powers reached this level? Even the ordinary residents that I don't know wish to kill me, and have actually rose to arms? Man! Just as he spoke, Anderson pulled his right rib and nearly cried out in pain. No, no, no. The real circumstance is that a person plagued with bad luck shouldn't do things like hunt pirates. The reason why Klein had abandoned approaching the target to attempt to control them with spirit body threads was because he had thought of a possibility. The passers-by were implanted with psychological cues or had suffered manipulation on the psyche level. Only then would they attack Anderson in an orderly fashion. This didn't match the beyonder powers of a desire apostle, as the attacks by the manipulated passers-by were targeted and precise, without showing any observed signs of preparation. And Klein had formerly heard of the name of the potion formula of a sequence 4 manipulator. In addition, according to the psychiatrist released from Creeping Hunger, Klein always suspected that Toscarter Island had a mission or figure related to the psychology alchemists. In addition to the psychological cue and the control on the left side of the mind, it was rather similar to that of the spectator pathway. Klein had long believed that a manipulator very likely belonged to the spectator or dragon pathway, thus making the outline of the matter relatively clear. The psychology alchemists really does have an important base in Toscarter Island. They also sent a sequence 4 demigod go watch over it. This demigod influences certain pirates and makes them unknowingly do his bidding. But these pirates had unfortunately ended up as Anderson Hood's sponsors last night. Hence, their true investor came knocking. Keeping his expressions in check, Klein looked at Anderson and indifferently said to him, "It's likely that one or several of the pirates from last night is involved with a hidden demigod on this island. Do you think something like that can be done by a mid-sequence beyonder? I can't be that unlucky, right?" Anderson's voice grew softer before it turned into a mutter. "Indeed, those people were controlled and are innocent. Thankfully, I didn't attack back, or I would become the main suspect of a shocking murder case and be given a bounty. When that happens, I'll be in trouble and could only become a pirate." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly. If the ones being controlled had been pirates with beyonder powers, or mandated punishers, or priests of the Church of Storms, how would it develop? I would already be dead. Anderson threw up his hands as he said in realization, "You mean he doesn't want me dead and only wants to give me a warning?" Klein nodded in a serious manner and said, "So you still have a chance. Yes, to apologize. Go see what that demigod is up to. Apologize." Anderson's face wrinkled immediately. Placed in a difficult position, he said with great difficulty, "I have quite a reputation in the Fog Sea." Klein didn't say a thing. He stood up, patted his coat, and prepared to walk off. At this moment, Anderson lunged forward and rushed to the entrance of the staircase ahead of Klein. He yelled, "I'm sorry. It was my fault. We can talk about anything." He paused for a second and repeated again, "I'm sorry. It was my fault. We can talk about anything." Clap, clap, clap. A series of slow claps sounded on the first floor as a figure appeared at the staircase. Amidst the light footsteps, this figure slowly walked to the bend, but Klein instinctively moved his gaze away, as though he didn't wish to know what that person looked like. In addition, he realized that he didn't have any intentions of raising his arms or aiming his gun. It was as though he had been cued and had lost the intention of resisting. This is terrifying. Yes, it's not a face-to-face hypnosis, which is why I could detect it. But if I was directly targeted, the repercussions would be unimaginable. I can be influenced now. In the way Miss Justice would explain it, the other party will use the sea of collective subconscious to silently arrive beside my island of consciousness, and then they would do something to a certain extent. Klein came to a realization as he had the sudden urge to leave and return to his room. This is the silent instruction given to me by the demigod. Klein roughly understood that the other party wished to communicate with Anderson in private. Hence, he didn't resist and walked to the stairs before returning to his room. In less than 5 minutes, Anderson knocked on his door, his face grimacing. "Done talking?" Klein asked without much surprise. Anderson gave a heavy nod. "Phew. Yes, he got me to help him do something. As for what is it, I can't tell others." "Do you still remember what he looks like?" Klein deliberately asked. Anderson thought carefully as he suddenly frowned. "I don't remember." "As expected. Look at you. For 1,600 pounds, you offended a demigod. It wasn't worth it at all." Klein silently sighed and then said, "Can we leave tomorrow?" "Yes. There's no rush for that matter. Let's resolve the problem with my bad luck first." Anderson didn't hesitate to answer. Klein didn't speak further as he pointed at the floor. "Still having breakfast?" Anderson was first taken aback before revealing a smile. "Of course. No type of frustration can influence eating and sleeping. The two went down to the first floor and discovered that the waiter was silently clearing up the shattered items. The boss and the customers had all forgotten what had happened. After breakfast, Anderson continued going out, busy obtaining his bounty rewards and beyonder characteristics money. He also did some preparations while Klein stayed in his hotel room, converging the spirituality that overflowed from his advancement and using worms to test his marionettist beyonder powers. At 2:30 in the afternoon, he went above the gray fog ahead of time and began practicing for the upcoming tarot gathering. After all, Mr. Fool would very casually and lightly punish the hermit Katlia. Sitting in the chair belonging to the Fool, Klein began playing out the 3 punishment plans he had decided over the past few days. 2 of the plans needed him to borrow some of the power of this space, and 2 of them needed to use props. Hence, he needed to decide on the entire process ahead of time. He would then familiarize himself with it, and he couldn't reveal his lack of fluency at the critical moment. After an unknown period of time, Klein exhaled and confirmed his plan. Then he conjured the world. Without any items, he saw the countless dense black threads that emanated from his body. Items conjured using the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog possess a certain amount of spirituality, so they come equipped with spirit body threads. And in the real world, items without life do not have any. Klein familiarly controlled the black threads and quickly completely controlled the world. Now, not only could he make the world's expressions more intricate and have reactions that were more like a real person, he could also make the marionette's spirituality fluctuations become more natural. It wouldn't appear as lifeless anymore. Apart from that, he was like a player who had 2 accounts, gaining the world's vision, hearing, as well as his other senses. After completing all of this, Klein glanced at his golden pocket watch, sent Little Son a message, and began to silently count his heartbeats. Chapter 678. Punishment. On the 2 sides of the ancient mottled bronze table, blurry figures extended outward from the embrace of deep red beams of light, before turning corporeal. The surroundings remained as silent and empty as always, as though no living creature had ever set foot there for millions of years. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Audrey's brisk and cheerful voice soon resounded through the resplendent palace held up by stone columns. Klein nodded his head with a smile, watching as the other members expressed their greetings under Miss Justice's lead. Here, there was no doubt that the hermit Katlia appeared rather reticent. Audrey's read on her was that she had many things on her mind. After the voices came to a stop, and the members had taken their seats, the Fool Klein swept Miss Justice a glance, making the psychiatrist instantly understand his intentions. Hence, she didn't raise her hand slightly and speak out. Following that, he looked at Katlia and chuckled indifferently. "Tell Bernadette that she can use certain items in exchange for some answers." Bernadette. After hearing this familiar name, which was neither Queen Mystic, the owner of Dawn, nor the leader of the element Dawn, Katlia realized that Mr. Fool already knew everything. Her cheap tricks were laid bare in front of him. This made her heart sink, as she couldn't help but feel an intense sense of fear. She was temporarily at a loss in regard to the attitude, or words, that she needed to show in response. To her, Mr. Fool's words were clear. Pass on the message, but only that one message, nothing else. She wasn't allowed to provide any other hints. Katlia believed she knew what he meant between the lines. Bernadette? That's a common name for Intis females. Who could it be? What is the answer she wishes to exchange for? What relationship does she have with Ma'am Hermit? Ma'am Hermit had privately made a request, and Mr. Fool's answer is yes? No, that's not it. Definitely not it. If it's a private and reasonable request, Ma'am Hermit wouldn't have mentioned it specially in front of us. He would have directly replied to her prayers. He is giving a warning. Audrey forgot to observe the other members as a series of questions flashed through her mind. Following that, with her acumen from the spectator pathway, she grasped Mr. Fool's true intentions. Following that, she had a particular theory. Ma'am Hermit had privately hinted about our tarot club to this Ma'am Bernadette. because she hopes to acquire some answers. Mr. Fool is very displeased regarding this matter, so he pointed it out directly and gave this first-time offender a warning? Seriously, why would you divulge matters of the gathering to others? I haven't even told Susie. This will bring danger to everyone. Thankfully, Mr. Fool is around. Audrey nearly puffed up her cheeks, forgetting her image and etiquette. For the first time, she realized that not every tarot club member had a sense of belonging like she did, showing such reverence and faith in Mr. Fool. The Hanged Man Alger, the Magician Furs, and the Moon Emlyn also had similar questions and theories, but their focus wasn't the same. As Alger anticipated what Mr. Fool would do, he began to wonder who this Bernadette, a commonly seen female Intis name, represented. He was curious as to why the reserved hermit would risk divulging some information on the tarot club. While Furs was worried if the existence of the tarot club would be exposed, she also instantly imagined a spy and double spy story. Emlyn watched in schadenfreude, believing the hermit to be truly foolish. Even our Sanguine's ancestor treats Mr. Fool equally, and had sent me as an envoy to be nurtured. You aren't even a demigod, but you attempted to try pulling off cheap tricks under Mr. Fool's watch? Do you have a death wish? Indeed, I can't understand the thoughts of short-lived creatures. Emperor Roselle once said that bugs that can only live in summer have no way of truly knowing what snow looks like. Emlyn sat back in a relaxed manner, as he didn't hide the shaking of his head. The son Derek didn't have many thoughts on the matter. All he felt was that the mood wasn't right. Out of curiosity and puzzlement he asked, Mr. Fool, who's Bernadette? Well asked. I thought Miss Justice would be the one asking. Yes, she seems a little angry, which is why she doesn't wish to speak. Klein silently commended him as he casually answered, Roselle's eldest daughter. Owner of the Dawn. The leader of the element Dawn. He mentioned all of Bernadette's identities, making her appear without any secrets before all the tarot club members. And the reason why he had used Owner of the Dawn in place of Queen Mystic was that Klein didn't believe that the Fool should address Bernadette as a queen. The Owner of the Dawn, Queen Mystic. She's actually Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter. Ha! The Hermit. I can confirm that you are Admiral of Stars Catlia. So the rumors of you having a falling out with Queen Mystic are fake. Alger felt excited. He felt that the restriction and pressure he had endured for the past 3 months had vanished at once. This made his staid self mock the hermit inwardly. Emperor Roselle once said that those who play with fire will ultimately burn themselves. And you, Admiral of Stars, dared to challenge a god's clairvoyance. At that moment, Alger was rather thankful. Thankful that although he had attempted to pull off some cheap tricks, and attempted to figure out Mr. Fool's identity, goals, and present state, he hadn't involved any outsiders. He hadn't divulged any information, so he hadn't suffered any punishment. As he had introduced the 4 kings and the 7 pirate admirals, Audrey and company just needed to recall in order to confirm that Bernadette was Queen Mystic, a demigod that reigned supreme over the 5 seas. They were also surprised that Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter would still be alive, and had become an important figure that was known throughout the world. The answers that Queen Mystic wishes to obtain are hidden inside Roselle's diary. Combining everything that had happened and the words that were said, Audrey vaguely guessed Bernadette's goal, believing that the Emperor's daughter wished to figure out the truth behind her father's assassination. At this moment, Catlia had already regained her ability to think. She turned her body to face the end of the long bronze table, and said without any hopes that she could be let off, Yes, I committed some mistakes. I will not defend myself. It was indeed wrong. Mr. Fool, no matter how much you punish me or even kill me, I'll accept it. Hypocrite. If Mr. Fool really wishes to punish you, do you think you have any means of resistance? Mr. Hanged Man scoffed on the opposite side of the table. He could identify the problem with such a simple sentence. Ma'am Hermit is still a little afraid. Audrey could notice the hidden fear from the minute actions and words Catlia had used. To her, people who deliberately emphasized their willingness to be executed were often afraid of dying right there and then. Furs found her peace from the Fool's calm attitude, believing that there weren't any leaks about the tarot club, or that the leaks weren't anything important. Hence, like Emlyn, she waited curiously and expectantly for the punishment Mr. Fool would mete out. Derek remained clueless about what had happened, uncertain why Ma'am Hermit would suddenly request to be punished. At that moment, seeing Mr. Fool's brief moment of silence, Katlia resisted her unease and lifted her head slightly, observing the existence behind the thick gray fog without a trace, in an attempt to figure out his true intentions so as to give a better response. She didn't wish to make another mistake again and provoke him, making the situation irredeemable. The dark purple hue in her black eyes produced a sense of mystery as her eyes penetrated through the gray fog and saw the Fool. Suddenly, Katlia's eyes heated up as illusory blood bled from them. A sinister, terrifying, and depraved language, and an indescribable roar sounded in her ears. It instantly filled her senses with extreme pain as her body began to convulse and tremble uncontrollably. Her face, hands, and the areas that weren't concealed by her clothing had quickly cracked open, revealing her flesh and blood. Inside, black worms and white moths squirmed before forming all kinds of indescribable eyes. Katlia's cries and painful grunts resounded above the gray fog, causing Alger, Emlyn, Furs, and company to exchange looks, as though they could sense the pain she was suffering. Meanwhile, the blurry figure turned rather clear, allowing them to see the hermit's mutation. The disgusting and nasty scene frightened Audrey enough for her to look away. She straightened her back and looked straight ahead without daring to move. Although the others didn't have such an exaggerated response, they also shared the same behavior. The true creator's ravings are indeed useful. Klein, who was shrouded in the thick gray fog, reflected from the bottom of his heart. The reason why he hadn't immediately replied to Katlia's request for punishment was because he wanted to confirm if there was anything special about her eyes, whether they could see beyond what he allowed. For this, he had stirred some of the mysterious space's powers to be hidden in the gray fog that shrouded him ahead of time. It was to connect anyone who used a Beyonder power to see through the obstacle to Tinder. This was equivalent to the owner of the Beyonder power directly observing an item corrupted by the true creator at a psyche level. Hence, with Klein not using the gray fog to deliberately suppress the influence, Katlia naturally heard the true creator's ravings. Her organ, which used the Beyonder power, was first severely damaged before she was imbued with extreme pain, causing her mutation. If Admiral of Stars hadn't tried observing him, then the plan Klein had prepared was to get her to apologize to every Tarot Club member, and also to allow them to discuss a method of punishment in a democratic manner. And regardless of how democratic it was, the major punishment would ultimately be to stir some of the mysterious space's powers to connect Katlia to Tinder. After waiting 2 seconds, Klein knew it was enough. He gently lowered his palms, allowing the gray fog to silently repress the true creator's ravings and revert Katlia's mutation. Admiral of Stars trembled as she calmed down at a discernible pace. The cracks in her skin gradually closed as her thoughts returned to her, allowing her to take in her surroundings once again. At this moment, Alger said in a deep voice, as though he was warning himself, "Do not pry into the mystery of God." Chapter 679, Murder Request. Do not pry into the mystery of God. Alger's whispers soon disappeared, but it continued resounding in everyone's ears, making them realize a reality. Although Mr. Fool often didn't put on any airs and seldom spoke, nearly answering every request they had, making them find him warm, he was ultimately a god whose mysteries shouldn't be pried into. He was a god that transcended reality. Audrey, Emlyn, and the other Tarot Club members instinctively accepted Mr. Hangman's altered saying, pretending that they had forgotten the original wording to be, "Do not look directly at God," because they had looked at Mr. Fool from time to time, asking him questions or seeking his advice. And with regards to that, Mr. Fool didn't seem to mind. Of course, we weren't looking at him directly due to the thick gray fog's obstruction. From Ma'am Hermit's outcome, Mr. Fool had done so for our own good. Audrey slowly exhaled. At this moment, the Fool Klein was thinking, Mr. Hangman is working very well in concert. I was prepared to control the world, to say something similar, to complete the final step of the punishment. He originally felt that getting the fake world to say something like, "Do not lie to God," or "Do not pry into the mystery of God," would make it somewhat embarrassing. In the future, if people were to learn that the so-called blessed or the so-called world was actually a smurf of the fool, he would be too embarrassed to face anyone. But later, on second thought, the world had done similar deeds in the past, so he wasn't short of one more. Besides, all he needed to do was to not let anyone know, right? Having overcome his mental barrier, Klein had planned on acting according to his rehearsals. But to his surprise, reality went better than he had expected. The hanged man seemed to be shocked to the bone as a result of the hermit's punishment. As such, he helped him say the sentence, "Do not pry into the mystery of God," making the effects even more natural and perfect. Yes, the problem of Ma'am Hermit's leak of information regarding the Tarot Club was only briefly tapped on by the fool. He had given a warning via the insinuation behind his words, but she later suffered from prying into the mystery of a god. It wasn't truly the fool's intentions. This is the outcome I wish for the most. This can effectively uphold the fool's image. After all, a god wouldn't be petty with mortals, as it would only tarnish his reputation. However, the way Ma'am Hermit does things is way too bold. I just realized and confirmed today that she has pried into the mysteries of the fool more than once. Although it wasn't for any vile motives, it's also something worth punishing her for. My previous reactions must have made her believe that I had acquiesced her observations, so she made it a habit. In the end, she ended up falling headfirst into my expectations. In addition, without fully grasping Mr. Fool's attitude, she directly gave hints to outsiders. Her boldness is obviously extraordinary. This means to show that she hasn't suffered enough in the past. Today's lesson should be enough to drill it into her for a very long period of time. Thinking back to her state in her dream, all of this seems pretty much the expected outcome. Sparing the rod spoils the child. I also managed to put Mr. Hanged Man, as well as the other members, in check today as a result. Klein silently muttered to himself in amusement, surveyed the area, and said calmly, "That shall be all." Upon hearing that, the hermit Katlia, whose spirit body had just recovered, felt relieved. She felt intense fatigue and joy surge through her body. All she wanted was a reclining chair for her to rest for a while. The first time is a warning, but the second time wouldn't be a nice outcome. This pirate admiral sighed silently, warning herself not to try her cheap tricks any further, or believe that her hints could fool Mr. Fool. She was also not to attempt to pry into his secrets. The pain she received was in no way weaker than the torment of having knowledge injected into her by the hidden sage. Therefore, she believed without a doubt that Mr. Fool was essentially a god, a true god, an unfathomable god whose mysteries couldn't be pried into. Thankfully, Her Majesty now knows where she can exchange the answers she has been desperately looking for all this while. I don't need to hint to her or tip her off in the future. Katlia turned her body to the side again, trembling as she looked at the end of the long bronze table. This time, she only dared to look at the end of the table or the armrest. The dark purple hue in her eyes had also turned faint. Amidst silence, with sincerity, she said, "I'll remember your leniency in sparing me." In the gray fog, the fool Klein nodded gently without repeating his previous words. After a moment of waiting, the magician Furs straightened her back, looked around, and spoke before Justice Audrey. "Everyone, is anyone interested in an assassination mission? The target is an important member of a cult." Grateful for the favors her teacher, Dorian Gray, had given her, Furs had been recently hoping to do something for him. After some consideration, she placed her sights on the Aurora Order Oracle, who had dealt immense damage to her teacher's family. Louis Veen, who could be a scribe or traveler. She didn't let Lamino's travels get to her head to the point of believing that she could kill an experienced Sequence 6 or Sequence 5 Beyonder, who was good at escaping. The reason why she had such considerations was that she believed that the secret organization known as the Tarot Club, which was backing her, would provide her with unimaginable support. Ma'am Hermit and Mr. World both appear to have the means to fight Louis Veen. with any of them taking action. And with me using Lamino's travels to help, it's not impossible for us to succeed. Furs began formulating the most ideal situation. Of course, she knew that her current savings weren't enough to kill a powerful beyonder like Louis Veen. After all, with her 830 pounds, she probably couldn't even buy a single hand of his. She knew very well that back then, Miss Audrey Hall had spent more than 10,000 pounds to kill an Intis ambassador, a Sequence 6 conspirer. The cost of assassinating Louis Veen, who was of a similar sequence or even higher, was obvious. Furs planned on agreeing to a series of requests that the executor of the mission would have, helping the executor complete matters they found inconvenient to do themselves, in order to pay off the cost of the mission. She believed that after obtaining Lamino's travels, she was equipped with the abilities to complete certain difficult tasks. After hearing Miss Magician's request, the hermit Catlia, the hanged man Alger, and Justice Audrey cast their gazes onto the world. They believed that this gentleman, one who had a unique penchant for hunting beyonders, possessed the necessary strength. I'm not in Backlund. However, I can't respond that way. Otherwise, it would expose the possibility that Mr. Fool only has 2 to 3 blessed to Mr. Hanged Man and Ma'am Hermit. Klein controlled the world, overcoming his emotions as he hoarsely laughed. Where? Which cult? What's his sequence? What unique powers does he have? And Mr. World is a little different from before. I can't explain it clearly, but it feels like he's suddenly in a better mood. Perhaps, he has really encountered something worth being happy about. Audrey suddenly noticed the difference, as she excitedly imagined what could have recently happened to Mr. World. Furs happily replied. He's an oracle from the Aurora Order. He's in Backlund, formerly a Sequence 6, but he might be a Sequence 5 now, but I can't be sure. He can record the beyonder powers that others have used, and can use them once. He's good at escaping any form of entrapment, and it's difficult to surround him. Perhaps, he might be able to travel through the spirit world. The target is an oracle from the Aurora Order, a Sequence 6 or 5, with powers seemingly from the apprentice pathway. Indeed, Miss Magician doesn't appear as simple and ordinary as she seems. My original judgment was right. Catlia quickly returned to her usual state. She wasn't surprised that the magician would actually dare conspire against a particular gentleman from the Aurora Order. As for which oracle he was, she wasn't sure because the only ones she knew were Mr. Z and Ma'am D. Meanwhile, Klein also quickly evaluated the situation. An oracle from the Aurora Order. That makes it impossible for him to be innocent. Rather, he's a madman who destroys lives. Killing him doesn't make me feel guilty. It's not like I haven't offended the Aurora Order more than once or twice. Sequence 6 or 5. That's something I can handle. I've seen something that matches the trait of recording and releasing beyonder powers, as described by Miss Magician. Mr. A had used it before, but it might not really be it. To me, it doesn't matter if he's good at escaping and traveling through the spirit world. As long as I'm close to the oracle and successfully control his spirit body threads, there will be no way for him to run. It's hard to tell what will happen in a direct clash. I do have quite a solid chance of success if I sneak an attack in. Of course, succeeding at a sneak attack is a whole other matter. After some serious consideration, the world looked at the magician Furs. I can consider taking on the job, but not anytime soon. It will at the least be 2 months later. He wasn't sure what other accidents he would encounter at sea, so he had been rather relaxed on the time period. 2 months later. Furs repeated the time, appearing to be in a deep dilemma. It was too long. Besides, she wasn't sure how long Louis Veen would stay in Backlund. At this moment Alger, who had been watching from the side, deliberated and interjected. Miss Magician, do you need to kill that Aurora Order oracle personally? No, as you can see. I'm considering requesting Mr. World for help. Furs replied with a smile. Alger nodded as though in thought. The premise of killing someone is to be able to find the oracle. Can you find him? No, but I'll investigate, Furs answered frankly. Why don't you get the world to do it after your investigations bear fruit? The hanged man pressed. Yes, but I haven't decided. Furs was somewhat confused. unaware of the reasons as to why Mr. Hanged Man was asking her all these questions. Alger sneered. If you can confirm the location of the Aurora Order Oracle's location, then why spend large amounts of money to hire someone to kill him? Wouldn't reporting him directly to the churches be enough? After the Great Smog, no church is willing to let go of any related clues. He wasn't trying to make the world lose any business. Instead, he had clearly read the dilemma inside her, believing that there was a higher possibility of her not going through with the request. After all, too many incidents might happen in 2 months. Therefore, he gave some suggestions to ensure that this matter reached some preliminary agreement. Report him to the churches? This sounds familiar. Klein was surprised, never expecting Mr. Hanged Man to say something like that. Haha. While everyone is being infected by Mr. Hanged Man, he too has been influenced by us. Klein immediately felt relieved and rather pleased. Report. Furs was momentarily stunned. After a few seconds she whispered, "That's possible." The Hanged Man smiled upon hearing that. "You can do it this way. First, investigate your target and seek out his whereabouts. If you obtain anything in 2 months, then you can hand the matter over to the church. If the matter exceeds 2 months, and when Mr. World is free, then he can provide you the help needed. What do you think of that?" First seriously considered it and said, "Okay, when the time comes, I'll discuss the price with Mr. World." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.